Good afternoon. Are we on? Okay, good afternoon. Go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll begin our presentations with the County Attorney's Office and Amy Folsom.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for allowing me to be here. I'm understanding they're going to tie me to the mic, which is presumptively offensive to a litigator, so I apologize in advance for that. My name is Amy Folsom. I am the newly minted, newly appointed, very green, wet behind the ears county attorney. I was just appointed county attorney July 2nd of this year after my predecessor, Bill Lewis, left the office, and am honored and privileged to be holding this office and certainly to be standing in front of you today. By way of background, I'm relatively new to the civil side of the county, but I was hired way back in 1996 by John Suthers and Jeannie Smith as a baby district attorney. So I spent 13 years with the district attorney's office and prosecuted speeding tickets up to homicides, and then about 3.5 years ago was invited to come over and practice civil law in defense of the county. So over the past 3.5 years, I've been doing civil defense. Whenever whoever sued us, I was the one that stepped in and proffered the representation. So again, I'm honored to be in this current position, brand new, very, very exciting. It's my understanding that many of you, it sounds like the process has been undergone for quite some time, so you have a fundamental understanding of how the county works, and I bet a fundamental understanding of at least the basic services provided by the county attorney's office. I want to go over a few of those very, very briefly, not to insult you, but certainly coming over from the criminal side, what struck me most about the county attorney's office, as distinguished from the DA's office, was the sheer breadth and depth of legal services that the county needed, and therefore that in-house counsel the county attorney's office needed to provide. So I do, if nothing else is accomplished today, I do want to at least instill in you maybe a little bit more of an understanding than that which you would have had prior to us meeting today. And I always prefer a colloquy as opposed to a monologue, so invite any questions at any point in time. None of this has to happen in any sort of certain order. I'll talk to you a little bit about the mission of the county attorney's office. It's going to be nothing surprising. The role of the county attorney's office vis-a-vis our board elected officials as well as our non-boards, are what we've got going on for personnel, how it compares to other jurisdictions, some of the great things that we've done, and I'll highlight kind of our flagship thing that we've done in El Paso County, which is to bring our litigation and litigation defense back in-house and handle that right from inside the county attorney's office. And then we can talk very briefly about our future needs. The mission of the county attorney's office, I'm not going to read it to you. It's just as I've stated. Our job is to provide the best quality, timely, efficient, effective legal services to everybody else in the county. Okay? So how I like to liken that is, we're a really, really small, but really, really crucial cog in this great big wheel that is El Paso County. We represent not only the county proper and the Board of County Commissioners in anything and everything, but the individual elected officials and also the individual employees who get themselves in jams while in the course and scope of their employment. I want to highlight just again some of the breadth of the things and the legal services that we do. Obviously, my name's up on the dais. We sit with the board during BOCC meetings and answer all manner of obscure legal-related questions, much of which we don't know the answer to, but it's our job to serve in that role and answer questions as they come up during the board meetings. Certainly on a daily basis, we're answering questions from elected officials, employees, the types of questions that we get. If I had an hour to talk to you, I could spend that entire hour giving you examples of the variety of questions. For example, I got a call from the clerk and recorder's office earlier this morning that we've got petitioners standing outside of CSC and asking people to register for certain voter drives. But by definition, they're kind of impeding the ingress and egress of some of the public, so they need legal advice about where they can make those folks stand. How far can we back those folks up and still, comply with their First Amendment rights to petition? So that's something I did this morning. Another thing I did this morning was meet with CSPD and talk about medical marijuana. I have the privilege of coming to see you folks here this afternoon, and in a little bit I'll meet with the HBA to discuss fire code issues. So that is something that can happen on any given day. A big function I've already talked about is representing the BOCC. Another thing that, again, we've recently started to do as of 2008 when I joined the office is to affirmatively provide legal representation for county employees who are being sued. We do that both in federal court and in state court. The federal court litigation matters are usually constitutional ones. Those are really big cases and big money cases that we see coming out of, for example, the jail. If someone dies while incarcerated in Sheriff Maketa's jail, there is almost certainly a loved one who would like nothing more than to blame that death on the jail and therefore on El Paso County. And as you're probably aware, death cases, cases wherein law enforcement didn't do everything they could to provide the medical care or to keep somebody alive can result in hundreds of thousands of dollars and even millions of dollars in damages. So it's unique for El Paso County to keep those types of situations in-house, but I'm happy to report that we're not only doing it, but that we're doing it very well. And I'll share some of those figures with you here in a little bit. Some of the state court cases that we see involve motor vehicle accidents. We've got a lot of vehicles on the road, snowplows knocking over mailboxes, sheriff's deputies, unfortunately being negligent at times and running red lights and causing personal injuries. So we see quite a bit of those as well. As you know, we've got 2,000 plus employees in the county, the vast, vast majority of whom are magnificent and wonderful, but sometimes they get into scraps themselves. So we handle in-house the vast majority of our employment-related issues as well. Employee on employee, supervisory issues. It also includes due process and unemployment hearings per county policy. Transportation issues, First Amendment issues that I've already talked about. We do 95 to 98% of all intergovernmental agreements, leases, real estate transactions, all the types of paper-heavy contract-type documents also in-house in the office. One thing that we do that I'd like to do a lot more of is get more involved in the risk management aspect of the county. Right now, I have to say that your county attorney's office, in terms of defense of the county, is primarily reactive, meaning we're doing a really, really great job of stepping up and providing a defense after we get sued. One area I think we could really improve on is getting out, to all of our employees, our DOT folks, some of our folks who have the greatest risk for causing the county liability, and doing some training. So we do work very actively with risk management, but I do have to confess at this point it is mostly reactive. CORA requests, we handle prosecution for liquor code enforcements, water reviews, real estate, bankruptcy, and code enforcement matters. So everything from the small scale stuff to the big scale stuff. So with what do we do that? Our current general fund budget is $881,000, $611. And I don't know how much information you folks get. I don't want to mislead you with that figure. We do have funds from other sources coming in and out at any given time. There are certain situations, for example, with a Department of Transportation litigation matter that we can bill back to that department. So again, general fund is $881, but the total amount of funds coming in and out of the county attorney's office in any given year is around $1.1 million. With that, we are authorized at this point for 9 full-time employees is all. So we've got 7 currently filled. We're currently down 2 attorneys with the recent leaving of the office of my predecessor, Bill Lewis, and another attorney who went very recently too. I have one of those positions backfilled at this time, I think quite wisely, with an intern, because they're wonderful and fun and inexpensive legal services that I can use to backfill with. So our composition is myself, county attorney. I already told you a little bit about my background. The 3 other assistant county attorneys we've got on board are wonderful. I want to mention them briefly. Cole Emmons, who's been here, I want to say he's been in the county at least 15 years. His primary area of focus is real estate, land use, water law. He's got 23 years of legal experience and is a great asset. Lori Sego, she was a DA when I was over at the DA's office for a bit, and then came over, did some DHS work, and does now for the civil side, land use, real estate. She handles all of our nasty little medical marijuana regs and disputes. She's kind of our jack of all trades. Lori's a wonderful asset to the office. When we brought litigation over in-house in 2008, they brought me because I had trial experience. And as we pulled the cases in, we quickly realized it was too big of a job for one attorney. So Bill Lewis last year hired Diana May from the district attorney's office. She's an 19-year attorney, tried tons of our region's most high-profile cases in the last 5 to 10 years. She's a phenomenal asset. And she's also broadening her horizons a bit, and she's become our local government designee for oil and gas. So the operative point of that is our litigation folks who should really just be doing litigation have necessarily had to expand, and we all take up whatever kind of projects need to be done in the county attorney's office. That's a coincidence. Yep, she's gotten that a lot. Yep, she's not related to Mr. May.
You're actively hiring two attorneys that you're short?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's not a budgetary thing.
It's not a budgetary thing at this point, no, sir. And I'll qualify that a little bit. I'm actively hiring one and backfilling with an intern at this point who's pending bar results. I'll show you a couple figures. Obviously, I think like most county departments you're going to hear from, we're significantly smaller than comparable counties with fewer FTEs, and we run a pretty lean ship, I'm happy to say. 90+% of our budget, any monies we get are right back out to our folks. We're not operating cost heavy. 9% of our budget goes to operating expenses, which sometimes causes some questions. We do have to settle cases a lot, but as I'm sure you've already heard, we have a separate self-insurance fund from which we can pull those settlement dollars. So that sometimes causes confusion. So I'm here to tell you, I think we're a great value for El Paso County. This slide shows the relative population served by the various big counties and the numbers of FTEs as well as relative budgets. Again, with the caveat that our 881 really should look more like probably a 1.1. Arapahoe County, 22 FTEs doing substantively the same work, producing the same product that your county attorney's office is. 17 at Jeffco, 26 at Adams, and 10 at Douglas. Again, I just want to highlight one thing I think we have done really well is pulled that litigation back in-house. That's a scary thing to do because if it doesn't work really bad. So I'm happy to report that, with the 2 litigation attorneys, and I'm backfilling my position with another litigation attorney, that we have in fact been able to handle those and save the county quite a bit of money. And this graph kind of shows you our historical expenditures for outside counsel. In 2004, we had nearly $350,000 that we spent to hire outside counsel to perform services that we weren't equipped to do in-house. The bulk of those being litigation, and 2012 to date, we're at $3,500. So, I can certainly demonstrate a commitment to you that we're going to keep things in-house as much as possible unless there's a real risk that we're going to compromise some legal duty to any department.
Could you go back a slide? How much of their work is done with outside counsel?
For these counties, Reb, I don't have those figures. I'm happy to provide them to you. I can't, just a simple comparison to the city. I know there was a headline just a couple weeks ago that they're doing wonderful work over there, I'm sure, but to one law firm, I think they had in excess of 150 on just a couple issues.
Well, the reason I'm asking you is we're way below what the other counties are doing, and they may be farming out stuff that we don't even know.
They could be. They could be. Let's just assume they are. Obviously, there's lots of advantages to using in-house counsel. And why, my pitch to you is that the county attorney's office really is a valuable resource to the county. Like it or not, most departments need us. They need us to perform legal reviews. As some of you former commissioners and officials know, no resolution goes before the board and is made part of the community record without legal review. No contract is done without legal review. So my pitch to you is that, we're a small cog in the wheel, but we're one that if we get slowed down and if we're not properly funded and we don't have the right folks in the right position, we can certainly make a big difference. Looking forward to our budget needs for the near future. This is my request and the request I've made for administration. My request is one attorney FTE, which is approximately $90,000, including benefits. That's assuming I get a brand new attorney. Starting salaries for new attorneys are roughly, I think the DA's office is probably starting at about 55, and the DHS side of the office is starting at about 62. Of particular concern in the county attorney's office budget is we'd have no digital case management system. We are still operating under the process, even in our complex litigation, we're having to come back from court, rifle through documents, get things on calendars, which I'm happy to say works, but it's really a dangerous situation to be in because if you missed a deadline in federal court, that's a big deal. They don't like it and it can cost you a lot of money. Another area in our budget where we're just wholly deficient is our line item for our attorney training is $5,700. Ethically, we're obligated to have 45 hours of training every 3 years. So can it be done for 7 attorneys, $5,700? Yes. If you want to keep your attorneys trained up in substantive constitutional law, the type of law that's needed to aggressively defend cases in federal court, absolutely not. We need to be able to send our folks to the national trainings occasionally, get them up to speed and make contacts with people on a national level, which historically has never been done in the office. So these are what I've outlined going forward. I wish I could stand up here like I know the DA probably has and the sheriff has and say that the sky will fall if it doesn't happen and that rapists will go free. I don't have any horror stories on behalf of the county attorney's office other than to attempt to educate you and the public about the necessary role that we do play. It's hard to quantify the cost to the county if a land use matter is delayed 4 weeks because the county attorney's office just can't get to it. What is the cost to the developer? What is the cost to the county? What other cost savings we could reap if we had the folks to stay on top of what we need to stay on top of in a timely manner. So that's my oh so candid pitch to you. I've always found that candor to the court is paramount importance. So with that, I'll open it to questions.
If this was a perfect world, and of course we know it is, but if this was a perfect world, how much training dollars would you be looking at?
If this was a perfect world, I would hope for an additional 10. My estimate is for 15,000. That would be the bare minimum. I could get the folks, to the places that they need for 15.
$5,000 for a case management software system really seems like a pretty small number. I guess my question goes to cost savings. How many man hours are we using now, rifling through file cabinets, putting things on Outlook calendars, and how much more efficient will that make you? Are we going to see a cost benefit from spending the money? Will we be able to reduce in other areas?
Well, I think that's a phenomenal question. Although we've not done a specific analysis of that, I've got 2 paralegals right now who at least or 3 folks who at least in part have their hands in litigation. I would estimate that on any given week, just the mechanics of making sure the attorneys are where they need to be is probably a sum total 20-hour operation on any given week. And keep in mind, we're not just talking about calendaring the attorneys, but digital filing of documents, because we're still working on a paper system as well. I mean, that's a massive amount of time to print things out, get them duplicated, and get them where they need to be in paper files.
Shouldn't this be something, a part of IT? I guess what I'm saying, unless it's unique, it seems like everybody is coming and asking for something software-wise. I guess when we start having deliberations, is there any reason it's not? Have you asked IT for it?
You know, we haven't, and the reason for that, Reb, is the importance for us is to be able to link into the judicial systems. So we've estimated that it would be easier to buy the software program pre-made to link and more cost-effective than it would be to try to create something, certainly at a cost of $5,000.
So if $10,000 became available for extra for a training budget, $5,000 for a case management system, an extra $15,000 specifically to be spent on those items, would the efficiency increase to the level where maybe we don't need an additional FTE?
No, I wish I could say it would. I mean, it would help. It would absolutely help us manage our time better, manage our resources better. Yeah, I wish I could say it would. I can't represent to you that it would.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you all. Very nice meeting you as well.
We'll take a quick 5-minute break. Scheduled to start at 3 o'clock with the sheriff, so be back in 5 minutes.
tuned in if I were out there.
Yeah.
Probably live broadcast in the facility as we speak.
So we have to get you into the mic.
That mic won't have any problem picking it up.
Okay. Or there's this one too. There's this one too. So we can get
How long has CBOC been in existence? I don't even remember. When?
We started April voting.
Oh, wait, all right, so this is like my 4th year presenting. Well, for those of you that have been in here, you will see that the only new stuff is stuff that has deteriorated since our last meeting. There's a couple familiar faces. Other than that, a lot of the things that have been brought forward are those things that have yet to be addressed. I think last year after I presented either to CBOC or to the Board of County Commissioners, a quote in the paper read, Sheriff Maketa is asking for the moon. And, you know, I was somewhat offended by it, but I chuckled at the same time because that moon has been created by inaction on addressing the issues I repeatedly bring forward. And I think that responsibility rests with the Board of County Commissioners. My job as sheriff is clearly defined under state law, and we're going to touch on some of those. But I think it's probably most fitting that we kind of dive into the mission, the vision, through some of those descriptions, and then as I'm going through the presentation of what our needs are, what the challenges are, you'll see that relationship to the statutory requirements of my office. And those things that are not statutorily required, I am in consideration and deliberation of giving those back to the county because I've been eating the cost of them with little to no support for many years. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. You'll see it's that's our mission, and it really just centers around Colorado law. And of course, I think the personal touch is the determination to meet the growing expectations of our community. And I can assure you, the expectations of the community far exceed what the minimum statutory requirements are. That's why my patrol deputies respond to civil matters probably more often, 55 to 60% of the time, than they do criminal matters. Law only requires I go to criminal matters. So that's kind of the personal touch and the growing expectation that really didn't exist 20 years ago. Our vision is strategically plan and prepare for the necessary resources to meet the future needs in law enforcement, detention, wildland fire, search and rescue, and the civil process. And you'll see keywords in there, setting the standard in public safety. There's no doubt we've done that. We have programs that have been nationally recognized across this country as model programs. Several times our agency has been recognized nationally by accrediting authorities as a model agency in this country. You don't get to that level by accident. It takes work, it takes determination, innovation, flexibility, and a real commitment. And I have no problem saying that, and I've been around the country, I've seen enough agencies. I would not trade my agency for any other agency, but I can tell you there's a lot of law enforcement leaders, sheriffs, and police chiefs that would love to have my agency and our resume of accomplishments. Now, the one thing I would like to have from a lot of those agencies is the financial support to take advantage and to better serve the community, but we really can't swap, and I doubt they would send their budget over to me. Statutory responsibilities, custodian of the jail, that is my statutory requirement to operate the county jail. Under that 3010-511, you could check federal law and other state laws, and you'll see there's a lot of requirements for how that jail's operated. Matter of fact, when it really comes down to it, everything is really controlled by some act of legislation or some court decision. There's very little discretion other than the programs you implement. There's a minimum standard, and we have to meet that one, or we're liable for the cost and the violation of constitutional rights. Under state law, the sheriff is the fire warden of each county. I think all of us in this community are very familiar with the role of the sheriff's office and the dangers that wildland fires can present. whether they're in the wooded wildland or they're on a prairie. Both can be very dangerous and both are very different in nature and behavior. Transport of prisoners, another statutory requirement. By law, the sheriff, regardless of what jurisdiction the offender committed the offense, the sheriff is required to transport that offender to and from court, as well as execute writs, which is often the orders of the courts to bring a body from another jurisdiction to this jurisdiction. That could either be somewhere in the state, somewhere in the country, and with the assistance of the U.S. Marshal on very rare occasions outside the United States. But the sheriff's office is the arm of the courts when it comes to the movement of offenders that the courts deem appropriate and within their presence. 3010-516 is preserve the peace. Now, a lot of these laws were obviously written when the state was formed or the county was formed. They evolved over time, either through the legislative effort or court decisions that modified those laws. But preserve the peace is the basic statutory requirement that requires me to provide patrol services in the unincorporated parts of the county. Not only does it require it by law in the unincorporated area, but should a municipality elect not to have law enforcement, or if they do have it and they do away with it, the sheriff is required to provide law enforcement services for that municipality. Search and rescue. This is one of those that I think at some time when they were forming the counties in the state, they had a meeting and they decided they didn't know where to put this responsibility but felt it was needed. The sheriff stepped out for a water break, a restroom break, came in, and they said, congratulations, we voted, you have search and rescue responsibility. We're very fortunate in this community. I see sheriffs around the state kind of struggle with this, where their deputies are carrying climbing gear and picks and all that kind of equipment for, they are the search and rescue. And I'm fortunate in that we have a very dedicated not-for-profit that I have delegated my responsibilities to, and they conduct that search and rescue function with almost absolutely very little support from this county or my office. They do their fundraising. We do some grant work for them and funding at the state level to keep them operational. But not only are they very committed to self-funding, they also do a phenomenal job. They carry some of the highest certifications around the state, and it's not unusual for us to get calls from around the state to utilize our rescue team to go in after either stranded people or body recoveries in cliff areas, high altitude areas, and so forth. They're very, very fortunate to have them, and they do a phenomenal job. And then finally, something in this community that seems to be kind of important is the sheriff is the designated authority on the issuance of concealed carry permits in each county. Prior to 2003, a chief of police under state law could issue it. Very few of them did until they saw a revenue opportunity, and that's when the legislature scaled it back and said, no, we're going to delegate one authority, and that is now a statutory requirement of the sheriff. You can go ahead to the next one. This is very difficult to read. Wasn't intentional, and I can see even if I put on my glasses, it won't get much better. But it basically spells out the organizational structure, and maybe on your copies, you'll be able to see the assigned personnel, and I'll point out a couple things. If you look to the far left of that sheet, you'll see the detention. I think it's security operations and then security. You'll see where it says the authorized and then assigned, and in some cases the assigned would be the number of people that are currently assigned to that division. That can exceed the authorized. The authorized is what we're funded at. But in the case of our office, we run an academy. We know it's about 50 or about 49 weeks from the time they fill out an application and until the time they're through all their training. So we do an overhire. That overhire goes into the jail, and therefore they're usually over. This chart was from January 2012. I can't really see the numbers on there. It looks like at that time we were 2 over on sworn and 3 over on civilians. We had an academy graduate a few weeks ago. I think It was an academy of 25, and I think we're down to where we're 8 or 9 over right now. Something that changes fluidly and we'll expect to be balanced out or moving into a negative sometime in the December, January timeframe, primarily due to attrition, either retirements, terminations, or just resignations. But I think that'll be a resource so that if you kind of wonder where our people are assigned or a majority of them are assigned, it's a valuable handout for you to use. Those in the public probably find it somewhat difficult to read. We're going to kind of run through the budget breakdowns of each of our divisions, and as we're going through that, you'll see where that does tie back to a statutory requirement. And it'll kind of give you an idea of how heavily reliant we are on personnel, and that's the majority of our budget is personnel. Obviously, in law enforcement, there's going to be some operational costs, and we have those broke out in several different areas. We'll start with the Detention Bureau. That's the county jail. And the first statement there is only one jail in El Paso County. Regardless of whether Fountain, City of Colorado Springs, Monument, State Patrol, if they make an arrest anywhere in El Paso County, it's coming to the El Paso County Jail. And that is required at minimum under state law. Municipalities can operate their own jail, but it truly isn't very efficient. Having one system, one contract for medical and so forth, is the most efficient. We're also legally bound, as I mentioned, transport inmates to court, conduct extraditions. We can be impacted by local policies and hiring decisions, and I'll tell you that several years ago, there's a few of you that remember that when the City of Colorado Springs expanded their police force, that had a dramatic impact on us, on our jail, and there was really nothing we could do to react other than go to the board and let them know. We've seen a huge impact on number of arrests, which number of arrests also impacts the transports to court and the whole procedure from booking to release. It can also be affected by policy decisions such as, let's say, the State Patrol decides from now on every DUI will be a custodial arrest and they'll be forced to be booked into the jail and post bond. Those are things we can't control. We don't have the statutory authority to. But that's a simple example of how decisions made by other jurisdictions, law enforcement agencies in this county can affect our workload or have a dramatic impact on it. It's also driven by criminal activity, the courts, legislature, and state policies. The legislature every year goes into session. They attempt to address problems and perceived problems by passing new laws. Sometimes those are criminal laws. That places an unfunded mandate. They never fund the laws they pass. They will with the Department of Corrections, but not a county jail. And so it can certainly have a disparate impact on our operations, and it usually does, whether it's a law that impacts our law enforcement service or our detention service. Am I already running you out?
No, I apologize. I do have another commitment, and I very much apologize for having
That's okay.
presentation. I have seen it and will read it.
All right. Enjoy.
Sheriff Maketa, how much time do you spend when legislators are up in session, basically looking at, bills that they've introduced and giving them the true impacts? I know from serving on a school board what unfunded mandates can do to budgets, but a lot of times it has to be communication and so forth.
A trip up to the legislature is at a minimum 3/4 of a day. By the time you do driving time, you catch them or you testify in committee. It depends on what is happening and how detrimental it is, or how much representation from fellow sheriffs I feel will be comfortable, but it's very consuming. I hate it when they're in session. I feel like it increases my workload by 30%. And not only that, I usually assign at least 2 staff members to keep track, because the stuff comes from the legislation comes from every angle, and many times it would be very detrimental if we didn't have a voice, or at least have it modified to a point to where we can live within the scope of the intent of that legislation. But it's a very good question because it is very time consuming. So during that session, I would say my commitment is increased 30% from the phone conversations, the reading of the legislation, and the going up there. But I designate one person, 100% of their time, that's all their job is to stay active and engaged in the legislation and keep an eye out for it. Yep. I'll begin with the detention operations. Again, the program goal is how we have it titled. It gives a brief description. That is our intake, release, transport, court security. And I want to clarify a little bit about court security. My deputies that are in court are not bailiffs. They're not there for the general public. When they're in a courtroom, it's because we have an offender in custody and we are responsible for that offender. It's not like we can turn them over to the courts and walk away. We are responsible for them the entire time. So if we have a homicide trial taking place, especially if it's a very violent situation or where it could create a situation between rival gangs, we sometimes have to put 3 and 4 people in that courtroom to maintain the security of the courtroom, protect the offender, as well as make sure that the offender stays in custody depending on the consequences they're facing. So that can be a very fluid thing and really tax our resources tremendously. When you're talking about a high-profile case, some of the challenges we have to face is my deputies, although they're in there to keep an eye on the offender and we're responsible for the offender, they can't be seen exercising direct control over that offender in the presence of the jury. So they have to stay back, which increases the number of people. It's not like we can handcuff them, chain them to a bench, have a deputy sitting right behind them or right next to them. We kind of got to give that perception that they're not in custody in order to preserve the fair trial aspect. And it's little things like that that place a tremendous burden on our staffing and our resources. Aside from that, we also have the classification of inmates, which is a very high liability. When I talk about our responsibility to protect the inmates, it is a constitutional mandate under the 8th Amendment. The courts have ruled in favor of inmates when facilities and government entities have failed to protect any one individual inmate. So it's something we take very seriously, and it all begins with the classification of that inmate. One example would be, for instance, we get an individual with no priors, they come in on a DUI. The classification system is one that recognizes, does a history, and places that individual not only where they will be secure, but also where they will be safe. So we're not going to stick that individual in a ward of high-risk felons that have a potential for violence. We're not going to stick them in a ward that is consumed with sex offenders. And that's the responsibility in a very dramatic example of the requirement of inmate classification. And that's an area that hasn't seen staff increase since probably 1989-90, just to give an example, but it carries a lot of liability with it. You can see the personnel piece of that is right at $8 million, has 141 people assigned to that function or those functions. The operational component is about $713,000. And then you'll see the 2 biggest cost centers, which are the biggest single cost centers in our detention facility, and that is the medical contract at $4.3 million, and then the food contract at about $1.7. The considerable chunk of that $713,000 is our extradition costs. And again, we have to eat the costs of every extradition regardless of whose case it was originally. So if it's a robbery suspect in the city of Colorado Springs and they flee to Maine, it's our responsibility once they've been apprehended by Maine to go get them and bring them back. And we do that in 2 ways, either through the use of air travel, depending on the timeline we have available, or we have a contract with a private extradition company that is able to meet those requirements. Usually we have about 10 days, and by the time we're notified that everything is signed, it leaves us 4 to 5 days to get that person in our custody, just the way the process works.
Doesn't Colorado Springs help share those responsibilities?
No.
Costs if the crime happened in Colorado Springs?
That is correct. I've asked them if they'd like to, and they've said no. And it's because it's the sheriff's responsibility, as it states in state law, that the sheriff is responsible for that. So yeah, that's a cost the most costly one we faced was about $25,000, and that was the extradition of an individual in London. And just going through the process was very costly, not to mention the time of one U.S. Marshal and our staff to fly to London to take the person in custody and then bringing them back. But the DA's office was able to work out a plea agreement right at the deadline of when we were ready to carry that out. But those are the kind of things that we face. Now, we don't budget for that as an annual event. That would be very, very unusual for that to happen. But that's just one example of a circumstance where it almost did come to fruition. There's two costs on here that we have absolutely no control over that state law specifically identifies that the Board of County Commissioners is responsible for, and that is the medical contract for inmates and the food contract for inmates. Now, when you look at that, you see a number of $1.7 million, and your first thought is that's a lot of money. It's also a lot of meals. Today, our count was 1,423 inmates, I believe. Each of those inmates is fed 3 meals a day, and we have a certain level of calories that have to be provided, as well as the makeup of those calories. We can't just pump them through full of carbohydrates and fats. It has to have a balanced representation, and that is mandated by the courts. Our meal cost a couple years ago was right around 90 cents a meal. It has gone up just due to the cost of food. We're still right at or just under $1 per meal, which I think is pretty phenomenal when you think about it. But next to the Air Force Academy, I'm not sure there is another institution in this county that provides the number of meals we do 365 days a year. We also have a full-time dietitian as part of that contract who is responsible for the medical diets for a lot of our inmates, because I can assure you they do not represent the healthiest component of our population. Usually there's a lot of substance abuse involved. But you can see that aspect of our detention operations. It has received a $444,000 budget reduction. That is in the food service arena, as well as in the staffing and some of the operations, and that's a total of the reductions going back to 2004. Next is our floor security. That is probably our single largest operation. That is the actual security of the jail and the direct supervision and management of the inmates that are in our custody. There's about 214 people assigned to that division. Those are the individuals, again, that are directly responsible for the supervision of inmates. You'll see our cost in there is approximately $14 million in personnel, $32,000 in operations, for a total of $13,460,000, and that's after a $598,000 budget reduction, which was staffing. When I talk about staffing, I hate even using the term anymore, and it doesn't matter if I'm referring to the office overall, the jail, or the law enforcement. But when I use the term we're at full staffing or just over, we are truly at full staffing at a minimum staffing level. One person calls in sick, it creates a ripple effect that we have to respond to. If 5 people are injured as a result of, in patrol as a result of a work-related injury, we're scrambling to find bodies to cover a shift or a district or to provide support out there on the road to the deputies that are out there. I can tell you today, we had 6 people. Every week I get an update. 6 people out of the Law Enforcement Bureau, which are out of the patrol function, which represents 10% of our workforce, was out on either a personal type medical situation or a workers' comp situation. In the jail, I think the number was around 28 people that are out on some type of medical leave, whether it's workers' comp or personal injury. Those numbers, when we're dealing with those numbers, we're in a situation every day where we're juggling schedules to find bodies to come in and cover positions. And in the jail, it's almost more important because you have fixed posts. And those fixed posts have to be staffed. Everything from a deputy in each ward to the control room or the mod area that is responsible and is the primary backup to those deputies in the wards. Because once they're in there, if you have 3 wards on a floor, the doors are locked, that deputy is in there with 50, 60, 90 inmates. And the position out there is equally as important and is the eyes and ears for each of those deputies in the wards. Then you have control rooms that keep an eye on several mods. And right now under our staffing, we do not staff those mods. We don't staff all the control rooms. So we gamble every day. And then when somebody's off injured or somebody's sick, we're scrambling to pull people in to cover that post, because you cannot go unstaffed in any of those wards. If something bad happens and you don't have it staffed, guess who's responsible? The county. And it's an 8th Amendment violation. It's a failure to protect and keep an inmate safe, and we get sued. And it keeps the county attorney's office busier than they already are. This area is our heaviest human resource. Next to patrol, I mean, that's what gets the job done, is the people in there maintaining control among people that haven't been able to maintain control for themselves out in society, and it's been deemed appropriate that they be in custody. Next, we'll move into the Law Enforcement Bureau. That bureau is made up of investigations, patrol, and our Emergency Services Division. And you'll see they're responsible for the investigation of crimes. That's specifically spelled out in my constitutional responsibilities. Patrol, narcotics investigations, civil service, school resource officers, SWAT response, wildland fire hazmat, and explosive ordnance disposal. We have a joint metro unit with the city of Colorado Springs. We share calls and alternate them back and forth, which I think is a huge benefit to us, as well as they train together with the military as well. A lot of the ordinance we see in this particular community has some type of military tie to it, so it works out real well. We'll move on to the Investigations Division. They're responsible for investigating mainly the complex or violent crimes against persons, as well as property. They also handle all the sexual assault. When we have burglary rings or pattern crimes where we have repeated burglaries, we believe they're coming from a certain group of individuals. Our major crimes will jump into that with the support of our crime reduction unit. But overall, their first priority is crimes against people, sexual assault, homicide, assault. And then we have a property component of that as well as a sex crimes component. You can see the personnel cost for that is $2.4 million. The operational cost is $74,000, which is a very small number considering the forensic science and the cost associated with those that we often rely on. We're very fortunate that CBI picks up a majority of that for us, but we also have a joint crime lab with the city of Colorado Springs, and we cost share in that lab. So years where crimes are up high, especially crimes requiring a lot of scene processing, then we get hit with that. It's a floating number, and it's usually just a division of the cost to operate that lab for the investigation of crimes that have already occurred. The Investigations Division's budget since 2004 has been cut $97,000. That was out of personnel, and it operates at a $2.4 million level. You can see the number of personnel we have assigned. It's 35. That does include the fire marshal, deputy fire marshal, and the 2 civilians in the Emergency Services Division, which is all our planning and emergency operations center. The remainder are assigned to either Vice Narcotics, which is a joint unit with the city, or in our Investigations Division. So that number looks like a lot, but start combing out the specialties on that, especially Vice and Narcotics, our contribution to the metro unit, and we really have a minimal number of investigators that are handling a lot of cases, and they're actually doing a lot of good work. Go to the next one. Patrol, that is often referred to as the bread and butter. That is the most visible piece of the sheriff's office. That's what is really our identity, and that is that marked patrol unit that is patrolling neighborhoods or responding to crimes. Their responsibility is really responding to calls for service. And I made a comment in my opening comments that it would actually be real simple if all they had to do is answer a phone and say, make a determination if it was criminal or not, and if it was not criminal at that time, to terminate the call and say we don't need to go. But in many cases, we respond to those things that we know are civil on the front end to make sure it doesn't turn into a criminal act. And it can be something as simple as my neighbor's car is blocking part of my driveway. Can you do something about it? If we said, no, it's not our problem, you take care of it, it has a very high chance of ending up in a dispute, maybe turning physical. And we've had stories, at least over my career, where one neighbor shot another one or took a dozer to their house and destroyed it. I mean, it can turn into criminal. And so our responsibility is to go and to try to settle it before it turns into a crime, and that's our contribution to crime prevention. And those consume us. Those drive a lot of our calls for service. And sometimes what starts out as a call of you have 2 neighbors disputing over a property line, you've heard those conversations many times. It can turn violent, and by the time we get there, it has turned into a crime. And sometimes our response times to those is 30 to 40 minutes just because of the distance we are attempting to cover. You can see we have 115 people assigned to that. 92 of those are deputies. We have sergeants that are responsible for not only the specialized units like our crime reduction unit, traffic unit, but also we try to have at least 2 sergeants on at all times through 365 days a year. We like to have 1 up north and 1 down south. And most of the time those sergeants, other than responding where deputies need guidance, are really the cover to the deputy because there's not enough of them. If I take the entire north end of the county, if I draw a line at Woodman and run that straight east until we hit the county line, go north to Monument and west to Rampart, if we have 2 deputies up in that area covering all that area, we're doing very well. Very well. And if one gets a call, my hope is the sergeant or the deputy that is on the west side I-25 isn't trying to get as far out east as he sometimes has to provide cover, but that's a reality of what we talk about. And I'd like you to just kind of keep that in your mind when I start talking about the staffing needs we have that have gone unaddressed for several years now. Our patrol costs are about $7.8 million. 71,000 of that is operations. And a lot of that is just the disposable equipment they use or supplies. Not equipment, but supplies. Well, it can be equipment. They discharge a taser. That's a taser cartridge we got to buy. A lot of that is in the paperwork, the summonses that we have to have printed. If you've ever had multi-part carbon copies printed, you know it's a very expensive printing process. And those are the tool to get that individual into court and the appropriate charges filed. So there's operational costs. I know for a couple of years our paper costs were going up 20 and 30%. It seems to have stabilized for a while, but the printing and the cost of that was getting very costly. You'll see an ongoing budget reduction of $321,000. That is a culmination of budget cuts to the patrol division, almost all of which was staffing, because they don't have much of an operational budget to work with, so the cuts came in staffing. Go ahead to the next one. Emergency Services Division. There was probably no busier group from June 23rd on than these 4 people. Matter of fact, one of them is responsible for our planning and capturing all the resources, the deployment of the resources, the cost of the event. She is assigned to a Type 1 Incident Command Team, which that is a national resource. A couple of weeks before the Waldo Canyon fire broke out, she was up north on, I don't even remember what fire it was, they all ran together. I think it was not the Springer, doesn't matter, it was up north. As part of a Type 1 Incident Command structure up there, she came back here, I think she was only back here for 1 week, and our incident blew up on June 23rd, and then she melted right into our Type 1 Incident Command. And right now she's over in, I believe it's Idaho, as part of a Type 1 Incident Command team. Essentially, the person I rely on to capture all of the expenditures, all of the resources used, the vehicles used. Didn't even have enough time to complete her reports before she was put back on the board and deployed out to Idaho to help them out. So I went from 4 people down to 3 people. And 3 people in a Type 1 incident, or any incident, I don't care if it's a Type 2, Type 3, Type 1, have about a shelf life of 14 to 16 hours before exhaustion sits in, especially when you're in the heat of an event. And that's going to be one of my discussions with the commissioners this year, is we've been very fortunate to hang on to the people we have. We've got them a lot of training, but one person cannot run an EOC. And to move that person out, I've got to pull from somewhere else because the resources aren't there. And I think we do very well with volunteers. Matter of fact, I have the resources of 4 individuals here. One's a fire investigator. He was busy fighting the fire. A fire marshal, deputy fire marshal, and 2 civilians. One of those civilians is gone that fulfills a critical role. But that division has about 220 volunteers assigned to it. Both on the wildland fire team, we have volunteers coming in to run the EOC, but I couldn't ask for more commitment from our volunteers that we tap on, the wildland fire, the emergency service, our radio operators, the RACES group. But there comes a time where they begin to burn out as well. And their employers start calling saying, we need you at work. And they start getting taken away. On day 4 of the Waldo Canyon fire, my deputy fire marshal came to me and said, Sheriff, you know, we have resources available. We have the line guys. We have them ready to go out and cut, but I can't get engine bosses to come in and take our 2 fire trucks out. And you hear the term engine boss, obviously that's a guy that gets to drive the truck, but the term boss is very important in that because it's more than just being responsible for that truck. When that individual takes that truck out and the team assigned to that truck, he is personally responsible for their safety. And we're now having guys saying, look, I love being on the wildland fire team. I'll call when I'm needed. I'll stay as long as I can. I'll do what I need to do. But you know what? I got a taste of what a dangerous fire is like, and I don't know if I want to be responsible for these individuals I'm taking out into the field. So we can have the trucks sitting there. We can have the guys with the picks and the shovels and the hard hats and the bunker gear on, but we can't send them out blindly without somebody overseeing their mission and making sure they're safe. And a lot of responsibility comes with knowing 4 people and their lives are your responsibility. So my deputy fire marshal said, we got to sit down and talk because we've got to come up with money to at least through the fire season hire some guys to run our trucks. Hire guys with the qualifications to take these wildland line people, I think is what they call them, out into the field, oversee them, and keep them safe. Volunteers will do it until their boss calls or until they realize, I don't want to take responsibility for your 4 lives. I'll help you, I'll grab a pick, I'll join the line, but I don't want to do that. And that's some of the things that we faced, and it's some of the things I saw with our emergency services division, that we dump all of the planning of these events, the exercises of these events, and then when the event really happens, they're pushing themselves 16, 18, 24. The Patty that ran our emergency operations center probably went 2 days without sleep. And unless she left her desk, went in, closed her eyes for a while, because we don't have the appropriate staffing to deal with that. And even though a Type 1 team came in, their focus is the incident, we still have full responsibility for the county. Now, I could say, looking back, a lot of things went very, very well. People rose above and beyond any of my expectations. They kept the public safe. Our areas of responsibility were protected, and they contributed in every way they can. But it takes resources behind them to do that. It takes training, and sometimes it takes people, and we are understaffed in this area. One thing I will let you know, emergency services also includes hazardous materials. Last year we responded to 231 events, I believe. The man hours expended on those 231 events was about 2,100 to 2,200 man hours. Those 2 functions are not the responsibility of the sheriff. And I've begun discussions with the county administrator to let him know I can't eat that cost anymore. I can't pay the overtime for those people working 16 hours a day. It's not in my budget. I can't eat the cost of developing those plans. I can't eat the cost of pulling people out of the jail that are hazmat certified to go respond to a hazardous material scene when I have to pay somebody overtime to backfill for them, plus pay them if their event goes over their normal shift. And it is not my statutory responsibility. I would venture to ask any of you, what would you do if you were in my shoes and you didn't have the funding to do those 2 functions and they're not your statutory responsibility? You'd probably say, I'm not doing it. And I'm right there at doing that because I've eaten it too long and I can't do it anymore, and my budget already has been strained beyond what I may be able to recover from this year. So I just thought I'd share that. One of the most interesting points on this slide, we have $423,000 tied up in salaries. Operations is 0. So all those things those people did with a 0 operational budget. They do get grant funding. Sometimes you write a grant and you spend as many hours writing the grant and going through the audits at the end of the grant period, which is an annual thing for this unit, but we get $0 in operational support for them. So every plan we develop is developed in-house or through grant dollars, and it takes staff time to go out and research and hunt for those monies. And that's that dash right there is what has me reconsidering whether I'm going to continue to engage in this. And I've been told your office is very good at it, and I agree. Those people are very good at it. But we expect them to do something, and we're not supporting them. And either we support them or we're not doing it. Contract it out, do whatever you want to do. Total cost for that was $406,911. And the only operational cost they get is what we pull from other areas or what grants they write to cover their paper and pencils and computer supplies and copier materials and all that stuff. And it adds up. It gets expensive. Next, we'll move into the Support Service Bureau. That is broken down into two areas. They're responsible for the budget and grants, dispatch, fleet maintenance, human resource, our HR office, information technology, records, research and planning, as well as training. And then we kind of separate those duties out. The first one we'll go into is administration. And basically, that is the area that is responsible for our records management, the budget and finance, payroll, the hiring, recruiting, as well as internal affairs. The number of personnel assigned there is 41. You can see a majority of those are civilians. That is primarily our records system. And the records unit really is kind of the warehouse or the keepers of all the things we document, which in law enforcement, you go out on a scene, if there's a crime, there's going to be a report. If it's a large case involving multiple victims, it's going to be a lot of reports. Every interview, every piece of evidence, it's going to be documented, entered into that system. And that's typically where the public goes when they need police reports or records or the DA. That information is transferred over to the DA. But that's primarily what those folks are responsible for. You can see the dollar amount assigned to personnel. You look at the operational cost, the number looks pretty large, but that's also where we pay some of our facility rental, our range costs, our copier contracts, telephone contracts, and things of that nature. They're kept in this unit, not that that's the cost of the administration division, but they're the ones that pay the bill for the entire office, for the entire copier contract, not just the one in theirs, so it's kind of housed in there. We'll go to the next one is operations. That's our dispatch, information technology, vehicle maintenance, and then our training programs. We have a lot of our training that is statutorily required, certifications that have to be done. For instance, the sheriff of each county or the elected sheriff is required to have 24 hours of ongoing training annually. Well, deputies have that same requirement, members of the command staff, just under state law. Then periodically we get federal requirements. For instance, several years ago, the federal government came out and designated incident command training depending on the various level and responsibility of each individual. My deputies all had to receive ICS 100, 200, and I think it was 300. We had to pull them out of their duties to put them through this training to make sure they're familiar with the National Incident Command structure as well as the incident command systems that we would utilize in the event of a disaster. The levels I had to go through were all the way up and through, I think it was level 800. That was a federal mandate, and they gave us a specified time to reach that. That's what our training unit is responsible for. Not only that, but all the other plethora of required training, whether it's statutorily mandated, it's a high liability area, or through some type of accreditation that requires it, such as first aid, CPR, some of those. The biggest cost in our operations is our dispatch unit. That is all civilians. We dispatch for 23 different entities. A few of those are law enforcement. Most of them are fire departments that we dispatch for, and of course, we dispatch for ourselves. You'll see personnel costs in there, $2.9 million. Operations is $2 million. Included in that $2 million is our fuel cost, our training for the entire office, as well as our tires and those things associated with fleet. Did take $139,000 budget reduction, just like the others, but going back to 2004. You can see the total operational cost of that, including staffing, is $5,437,000. The capital fleet piece, that is the only capital in our budget, and that is our vehicle replacement. Our patrol cars average about 35,000 miles a year. A few years ago, realizing we need to stretch out the life of those vehicles, we do a combination of vehicle replacement. Usually when they get up around 120, 130,000 miles, we start seeing a lot of looseness in the steering, brake fade or wear and tear on the braking systems, hydraulics, suspension, steering, all those components. We decided, you know, if we could stretch the life of these cars out to 200,000 miles, we'd be reducing the operating cost of the life of that vehicle because we're spreading it out, the depreciation of it over a longer period of time. So now when those cars hit about 90 to 100,000, 110,000, we do a competitive bid process. We send them out for what we call refurbishment, and they go through the cars. They replace all the brake system, steering, suspension components, seat pans. Obviously, that's somebody's office, and it takes a lot of wear and tear in and out. So we replace the seat pans, door seals, and they go through. If the transmission is in need of replacement or the engine, they replace it. If they test out good, they keep it. We're now running our vehicles up to about 200,000 miles a year, and that comes at a cost of half the replacement cost. So it's somewhere between 9 and 11,000, depending on whether it needs a transmission or an engine. And then we also get an extended warranty with that car, very similar to what you'd get on a 3-year, 30,000 mile thing. So we're doing what we can to stretch those dollars out, and to be honest, it's worked out very well for us. The deputies feel comfortable with it. They feel safe. Matter of fact, the familiarity with that vehicle, they say it feels like a brand new vehicle. But there's a balance in that combination because you can't have them all getting that old, and sometimes once they get past 10 years, it gets a little harder to find the parts from GM and so forth on them, but it's been working out very well. But that is the only capital we have in our budget, and that is for vehicle replacement or refurbishment, and that's one of the programs that I'm pretty proud of that has worked out very beneficial, and that our deputies have confidence that vehicle will perform as though it were a new vehicle. Some of our other program budgets we'll kind of dive into. We have the flood warning system. That program was eliminated, I want to say, back in 2008, and now we've gone back to the old way of doing it, where you apply common sense and people that can look at a river and say, that's rising. And then they can radio back to the Emergency Operations Center and they can say, yep, the river's rising, we better start evacuating people. The flood warning system used to have sensors all around the county. It was a joint effort on behalf of the city of Colorado Springs and the county, and Lauren, I'm sure you remember this. And it just got to the point to where it needed replacement. The components were worn out, they were outdated, and the county didn't have the money, so to continue dumping $50,000 a year did not meet the needs to keep that system reliable. We went back to the old-fashioned way, and it worked pretty well. Sometimes it's a little delayed by the time you get somebody up there to look at a drainage and say, yep, it's flooding, and then you get the word back, but that's kind of the reality of the world we're living in, and that system was tested after the Waldo Canyon fires. It's amazing the science behind what happens to drainages and hillsides after they burned over. They almost repel the water. And I think one of the Forest Service people said, or not the Forest Service, it was hydrologists with the Forest Service, that it's something like 50 times or 500 times the volume of water will shed off the soil after a burn than before the burn. And I was personally witnessed it up Ute Pass. If you remember the first day, there was a mudslide that closed a couple of lanes. I went up to that very site and could not believe my eyes how much soil. It looked like a lava flow coming down. And a few days later, or a couple of weeks later, you saw the pickup truck almost completely engulfed in that very same mudslide. And if you look up at the hills to the head of the canyon that fed that mudslide, you'd think, there's no way that much water could do that much damage and bring down that much mud, and it did. So it's something that is pretty serious, and I think the flood warning is important. But, you know, when the technology is out of our reach financially, then we have to resort back to manual and old-fashioned ways. The 800 megahertz maintenance, the personnel costs, we have one person dedicated to that. We've cut back in that area. The operational cost is $500,000. That is basically the maintenance for the entire radio system for the unincorporated portion. That's our portion of the backbone or the infrastructure of the radio system, the tower sites, as well as the end user units. Like in law enforcement, it would be the radio in the car, as well as the HT on the cop's hip. We have the 800 megahertz person on our staff, but they monitor and do maintenance for the entire county's radio system. And it just worked out that we had an individual with that talent, so we took that responsibility on, and it's worked out pretty well. The $45,000 budget cut was a second FTE we had assigned to that, and like a lot of areas in the county, we just had to cut back. I want to comment very briefly on the 800 megahertz radio system. That is the lifeline to every first responder out there, and it is the link to the people that make the decisions or deploy resources depending on the event. And that system was put in place, I think it went live back in 1997, and the technology is becoming outdated, and the towers have stood, the tower sites have stood the wrath of Mother Nature on many occasions, and is coming up in need of some very costly maintenance or even replacement. And that is just on the physical elements or components to the tower system. In addition to that, the version of software that our system runs on is outdated. And like any product out there, when it becomes outdated, the manufacturer of that product decides it's not cost effective to continue to support that version of software. And our system, as of 2012, will no longer be supported by our vendor. It is old, the technology is outdated, they've moved on to several generations of equipment. The FCC has incorporated new regulations requiring the narrowing of the bandwidth that those transmissions travel across, and our equipment is not capable of meeting those requirements. 5 years ago, I went to the county and said, we've been put on notice that they will no longer support our radio equipment or the technology behind it. We're going to have to make plans to address this in the future. It's going to require the full replacement of all mobile units in the vehicles as well as the HTs, and a significant investment in the backbone of our radio system. Developed a plan to phase it in over 4 or 5 years, and there was no money each of those 4 or 5 years. So today, we have a system that is no longer supported. We've been saving old parts and pieces so that as a radio breaks, we can scrounge from, it's kind of the theory of keep 3 or 4 Chevys and Fords out in the backyard so you can pull parts to keep the one running. That's the scenario we're operating under. I've had a talk with the county administrator and let him know that we are now in a situation where as these radios, which are approaching 15, 20 years old, some are newer because they've been broken over the years or had to be purchased, but it's going to be more and more difficult because we can't purchase this version of radio and we have to migrate to the new equipment at some point. Right now, the most critical point is that our equipment is no longer supported. The next critical piece will be when our equipment starts to break and we have to make that transition to the narrow, to meet the federal requirements of the bandwidth that we have to operate within. Now that's a lot of technical stuff and I can't explain to you what it all means other than I do know what bandwidth means. I know there's been a trend to compress it and condense it and to shrink it so they can divide it up to allocate more bandwidth to other entities for whatever purpose. But that's the situation we're in with our radio system. The tower, the backbone investment for the county's portion, I've been told is between 6 and 8 million. The radio replacement, the unit replacement, the mic you press the button on and release when you communicate is probably going to be somewhere between 2 and 5 million. If we go with Motorola equipment, I think it's 4 to 5 million. We've been experimenting with another product out of Europe that is called Tate. We've been testing their equipment, and if we go with that, we can save about 30%. So I was told today we're probably looking somewhere 2 to 3 million. I don't know if that 2 to 3 million is just for the sheriff's office or if that includes the entire county operation, parks, DOT, and such. So that's a cost that I didn't build into my presentation, but it's a cost that's out there, and it's one that I reminded the county administrator that our failure to react and address is now creating a crisis. And when a crisis happens, everybody wants to know, how did this happen? Well, now you have the knowledge of how it happened. The money wasn't there for the 5 years that we should have been planning and addressing it. And it will be a crisis. When, I don't know. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. What did you say the replacement cost of the towers would be?
The replacement cost or the upgrade of the towers is between 6 and 8 million. For the county's portion, it's a regional radio system. So the city is a partner, the city of Colorado Springs, as well as the city utilities, and they'll have their responsibilities on their portion of it.
Terry, when we go to new system, will any of the old system be integrated, or do you literally have to, quote, take the old radio out and put a new radio in countywide?
Yeah, countywide, the handheld units that the cops carry, that the DOT people or the parks people carry, that unit has to be replaced. It is not designed to accept the reprogramming or any of that.
I'm talking about the ones in your vehicles.
Same thing.
So literally, it isn't a phasing of things.
No.
You just,
Well, Tate has Tate radio, and I'm sure Motorola has something very similar. We could, let's just say we have, trying to remember the number, countywide, I don't know. Let's say we have 500 radios, a combination of mobiles and desktops, and then the HTs, the handheld units. Tate has a version, and I think Motorola has the same thing, where that radio will work on our system up until a date. Then that radio that works on our current system will be replaced by a newer generation that will meet the FCC regulations. So we've been in negotiations of, can we buy like insurance and turn all these in? Now, once we make that leap to the next radio, it won't work on this system. But there comes a time where you have to say, we're replacing all the repeaters and the whatever they call all that stuff that hangs on those antennas, and then everything that is working with those has to already be upgraded. But there is a potential for a phase-in. It's just we're running out of time. Did that answer your question?
yeah, but it sounds to me like we ran out of time 5 years ago.
No, we ran out of time last year. It's going to be a costly thing. And sometimes that works for you and sometimes it works against you, but I think as you guys go through this process, you're going to realize the money's not there. The things that have to be funded are going to be funded, and it's going to be funded painfully, and it's not going to be any staffing issues. It's not going to be any capital I go through. It's not going to be the radios. It's going to be the bare necessities, gasoline, my inmate food contract, my inmate medical. I don't even need a crystal ball. I've seen this movie before. It ends the same way every time.
We need new directors. I didn't say that.
No, I didn't hear anything. We'll go ahead into, this is kind of a summary of the budget. I can tell you back in the old days, each county department, each elected official, Ken Kyle probably remembers this, had a capital line. And that capital line was a percentage of your base budget. That capital line is how you replaced equipment as it broke, the more expensive. I'm not talking staplers and stuff. It was major office equipment or field equipment, air packs that get damaged for our fire guys or whatever the case may be. That was eliminated in one of the temporary budget reductions of, I think it was 2001, maybe. You'll see that's still not there. So when that equipment breaks, we either scramble, we take it from somewhere else and just do without, or we come to the county and ask the county for sometimes ridiculous things. Our capital line at that time was right around $390,000. Today that capital line would be $470,000. In theory, it would grow as equipment got expensive, as the demands increased. And that's one of the weak points that I brought up to the county is there is no way to replace a lot of these things I'm going to present to you that need consideration for funding. And at some point, it's beyond consideration. It'll be funded. It has to be because it's a safety issue or it's a building function issue. And if it's not fixed, it's going to get people hurt, or you're not going to have access. So, but those are the long-term, what you're going to see are the long-term consequences of some of the decisions that have been made over the years. I want to run through some trends real quick. You guys can look at them on your own time. We just picked some of the crime trends that we compared to in 2006. We're seeing still a lot of cases with animal cruelty, child abuse, some child abuse resulting in death. Those are kind of just some of the highlights. Some of the stuff, it just goes up and down. If I were to trend every year, you'd see peaks of it, it would drop off, you'd see another peak, but it just kind of gives you an indication of what we're seeing out on the streets. The next slide is some of the challenges that we faced. They are the same challenges we've been facing for the last 10 years. There's nothing new. The gasoline one goes without saying. We have all felt that. The only difference is I doubt very many of you put 3 million miles a year on your vehicles. Well, it takes gas to cover each of those miles, so we go through a lot of gas. And when we go to the pump and see gas is up 10 cents, and we're putting in 20 gallons, imagine when we're going through 6,000 gallons each dump in our tanks down at CJC. I mean, it adds up. Ammunition costs, the cost of brass, primers, and copper has gone up. That's why you see bad guys stealing the copper lines that feed the light poles, because it carries some value. Well, that value we're seeing on the side of ammunition. And then, of course, we all know about medical costs, and the crime lab costs have continued to go up. I can assure you that our national health care will not reduce my medical costs in any way. I promise you that. So if that question was in the back of your mind, I just hope I've answered it. We'll move on to effects on all patrol districts. This is as a result of growth. This number captures, yes, sir.
Yeah, Terry, real quick, in terms of challenges, I recall your presentations in the past, and my recollection may be incorrect, but you had mentioned turnover being a problem.
Mentioned what?
Turnover.
Turnover.
Of deputies.
Yes.
Which is not surprising for a model agency. It's kind of get it on my resume. You're in demand by other departments, other counties. Do you have a turnover problem?
You know, I think attrition is healthy in every organization. It's what impact that attrition has and at what level of volume, because it does cost a lot of money to replace. I think the economy has been our friend in the last 2 years with attrition. We're still seeing people leaving for better working conditions and better pay, but not at the volume that I was seeing, where I was competing with agencies offering $30,000 sign-on bonuses if you come to work. I have not heard of me losing people to those situations. The numbers are down quite a bit. I'm going to guess my attrition rate among sworn is probably in the 6 to 7%, which I think is okay. It's healthy. There's years where I wish we had none, just simply because it costs so much to put on an academy, and the strain on my budget to put an academy on and is competing against my underfunding of my authorized positions, so it hurts. But at 6 to 7%, I know there's a lot of agencies that think that's pretty healthy. Among my civilian employees, which are significantly underpaid, I think the attrition rate in my dispatch center runs around 30 to 35%, which is totally unacceptable. But it's a very high-stress, multitask environment, and we do have trouble keeping people. We could hire 10 this year, and 4 of them are going to walk out within the first 3 days and say, I can't do this job. There's agencies that pay better, have less volume of call activity or more staffing, so the call activity per person is much more manageable. They'll go to those jobs. Across the civilian employees across the board, it's probably around 11 to 13%, which I think is a little high, and it does get costly continuously training and replacing those positions. I think a lot of that is work volume as well as pay. They leave and they get better paying jobs.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. I was going to say this represents the development or dwellings that have been approved. It can change. I mean, obviously, our housing market is much different than it was 6 years ago. There was massive growth taking place that had been on quite a run for several years. It has slowed down. We are still seeing growth in the unincorporated area. These are the plots and developments that were approved up until 2010. So they're still on the books, but there's many of these larger ones that I haven't seen take off. One of them was out in Ellicott, for instance. It was a 1,000-unit home. I don't think that they have begun building on that or accelerated, so they're on hold. But I think it would be remiss if we did not at least keep an eye that that is a potential. It's not necessarily a crisis today. It's not even on the radar for me today, but it's something that I keep in the back of my mind because the growth has slowed down considerably, but we are still seeing some growth. Most of the growth that we're seeing is in the lower-end homes, the entry-level homes, or on the very high end where it's maybe not growth, but it has stayed at a sustained level. And we keep track where that growth is occurring because that has an impact on our service delivery. Go ahead to the next slide. At that time, and this number hasn't changed a whole lot, we were looking at an additional 64,000 units over the next 10 years, let's say. So 64,000 units, the average household, 2.5, 2.75 people. You can kind of do the math, but I just thought I'd leave that in there and share it. Mainly that those numbers really haven't changed much. Those are still the plans. This chart is what my intent to illustrate was our operational cost in 2011. This data is 2011 data. We won't get the 2012 data for another month, but it kind of gives you an idea where we're at. I think when we ran ballot issue 1A, our cost per citizen was $72.40 per citizen. You can see in 2011, because of a combination of our budget reduction and population growth, we're at $71.22. Still far below the other comparable agencies. And those agencies that I'm using as a comparison are agencies, Douglas County is very adjacent to us. They have a whole different funding mechanism. But Jefferson, Arapahoe, and Adams, those counties are the closest counties to El Paso County with regard to a jail operation, which has a very direct impact on our budget, the cost of that jail size, but also their population demographics. El Paso County is probably 3 times larger than Jefferson and Arapahoe each. I mean, they're talking 700-800 square miles. We're at 2,160 square miles. So other than that, though, their population and jail size is very similar, although ours is higher, as well as our jail system is larger. See, again, a comparison of employees. Again, I show the cost per citizen, FTEs per 1,000, and in the jail ADP. The jail, that stands for the average daily population. Our jail system is the largest next to the city and county of Denver, which that's kind of a whole different animal, but we do have the largest county jail in the state with the highest average daily population. You can see the FTE per 1,000. Ours is at 0.97. You have Adams at 1.1, Arapahoe 1.9, Douglas 1.5. That doesn't sound like a lot, but to get us up to, let's say, 1.1 would probably take 40 to 50 employees. That's how much that number means when you're talking per 1,000. Just to make that little movement, that's the difference. When I first got into law enforcement and up through until about 1998, the industry standard was 2 per 1,000. Every agency, that was the benchmark. Some of them, Aurora even wrote into their city charter, they will always staff at 2 per 1,000 to ensure they have adequate coverage and response. In our county, I don't think 2 per 1,000 is reasonable. That's kind of gone off as a standard to more of a drawn a line, and as long as you're somewhere around there, you're probably doing pretty good. But it's more important to look at response times, individual cases, case clearance, those kind of things, the workload aspect. But I think in our county, with the miles we cover and as spread out as our population is, we should be at about 1.2, which is a far cry from 2, because to get to 2 is a ridiculous number that's not even reasonable. When I look at Arapahoe, I think they take, I think their unincorporated population is probably 40,000. So they're at 1.9. That's a good place to work on patrol. You're not going to be running crazy trying to get call to call. Go to the next slide. Typically, we have assigned 10 deputies to work 8 patrol districts. In reality, it's 10 deputies on paper. Very seldom works out that way. I have 60 patrol deputies. Those deputies each earn vacation, so they have 52 weeks for each of those 60 to take a vacation. You can see where I'm going with it. Not only that, they get sick, they get injured, they get ill, they come out for training. They may be SWAT members, have to go to training, EOD, hazmat, whatever the case may be. So the numbers get whittled down pretty quickly. We did get 6 patrol deputies in 1990, or since 1990, and they were cut in the budget reductions of 2009. That was at a time when we have seen, and it's been pretty consistent, 137% increase in calls for service, 43% growth. County, this isn't 1 year, this is over that period from 1990, 50% growth in the unincorporated population. The reason I throw in the growth county-wide is because people think, well, you should only worry about the unincorporated area, but we can't forget I am responsible for the jail, which serves the incorporated area. If their population goes up, it's going to have an impact. We do civil service in the city. That population increases, it's going to have an impact on us. And extraditions. If they're taking more cases and more people are fleeing, it's going to have an impact. So we can't ignore the fact that we do provide services to the entire county, whether you live in a municipality or not, and that's just part of the statutory responsibility. And I've asked city if they're willing to pick up the civil requirements inside the city, and they said no. I thought I'd offer it, but they didn't want it. And if I were them, I would say no too. State law says it's the sheriff's responsibility. Why argue with it? Go to the next slide. Threw in another comparison. You guys can take a look at this with the number of deputies assigned to do the law enforcement function, the patrol, basically, whether it's traffic or some type of special enforcement or school resource. We have the number of 105. That includes supervisors as well. You can compare us to the other agencies. I built the comparisons the same. If they included sergeants, lieutenants, and traffic and all that, we built it in. You can see the population served and the area that they're responsible for. And you see Jefferson, Arapahoe, Douglas, Adams. Adams would be probably the closest county to us at 1,100 square miles, 88 population, but they have 127 deputies handling that. Go to the next slide. This one gives an indication of our calls for service, priority ones, and the response time in that particular district. I'll tell you, District 1 and 2 are the north end of the county. District 1 would primarily be to the west of I-25, that whole area up there, probably north of, the north boundary of the Air Force Academy, including the Air Force Academy. We do have concurrent jurisdiction on the Air Force Academy. District 2 would be directly to the east of that, extending out to, not to the county line, probably to the edge of Black Forest. District 3 is Cimarron Hills. It's a very small, high-density area. District 4 is the entire eastern El Paso County. We have it split up into 2 sectors. District 5 would be security. District 6, Widefield. District 7, B Street 115. District 8 is up Ute Pass. The ones that are illustrated in red are the areas I have concern, because that's where the response times are in excess a majority of the time over 10 minutes. It would be unrealistic to say, I want enough staffing to get to every call in 10 minutes. It's just not realistic, or even every priority one. I think worse than being just as bad as almost being understaffed would be being overstaffed, and it would probably take a gross overstaffing to meet a 10-minute. So I look at it as if If we can get to that call within 10 minutes, 6 to 7 out of 10 times, I think we're doing very well. And so the ones illustrated in red are the ones where we are not even coming close, 6 or 7 out of 10 times. And you can see the response times. Priority 1 is it's in progress, and it's primarily designated as a priority 1 because there is an imminent threat to the responding deputies. So that's an armed suspect or something like that. Priority 2 is a serious crime that is in progress. Both of those will require 2-unit responses. So I just thought I'd point that out. For those of you that have sat on this committee, that's nothing new. The only thing is District 8 went from 11% of the time to 9%. District 2 has dropped down to 6%. We're seeing those times climb, as well as the percentage of time we get there in 10 minutes growing. That's what it means. Go to the next slide. We'll talk about the comparisons of our calls for service. This is by county for our total calls for service. You can see if you're a deputy in El Paso County, not only is there fewer per 1,000 of you working the road, you're also carrying a much heavier caseload than our friends to the north, Jefferson County, Adams County, Douglas, and Arapahoe. I'll tell you right now, Douglas County is a pretty good place to work. They got a lot of deputies. You're going to have cover when you go to a call, and they pay pretty good. They pay better than we do. So those are the things I compete with, going back to your question. It's the workload, it's the safety factor, and all those things enter into those decisions. The workload on our folks is pretty incredible. And sometimes we find they're not keeping up. And when they're not keeping up, it's the victim that pays for it. We're not getting the reports into the DA. The DA can't properly represent the case, and it's just an endless cycle. So I keep an eye on our calls for service and the volume of that, because then I have a better sense of what's going on. And if deputies are falling behind on their reports, it's not their fault. It's just purely a volume issue. And we can go to the next slide, and it's another comparison. This breaks it down to the number of calls for service per patrol deputy. Now, if I tell you that every column to the right of that blue column pays better than we do, and you look at that workload, where are you going to want to work? Yeah. I mean, Jefferson and Adams would be pretty good because you'd at least stay busy enough. But our guys do a phenomenal job out there. And every once in a while, I get complaints on them where somebody calls and said, you know, Deputy so-and-so was rude. He had an attitude with me. And I mean, I know them. And if it's not their normal attitude, I can say, you know what? We all have a bad day. And that deputy is one of the deputies that is carrying 2,100 cases a year. Now, some of those are very simple cases. But you may have caught him on a day where he's skewing his stats for that day, and he is having trouble keeping up, going call to call, and he's had to go to the bathroom for the last 4 calls, but he hasn't had time. He's human. And sometimes the people go, you know what, that makes sense. You're right. We do all have bad days. And I said, but I appreciate you bringing it on. I know that deputy personally, and they usually have great attitudes. So you caught him on a bad day, but we'll talk to him anyway. But these guys sometimes are under a lot of stress, and it's not just the volume of work. If you're doing 2,100 calls, your percentage of high-risk calls is going to be elevated as well. So you may be taking the number of high-risk calls that somebody in another agency has to deal with, the stress of that, the hypertension that goes along with it. You're doing it in 1 year, when in their career they may see it once every 4 years or 5 years, and you're doing it 10 times. And I'm seeing that impact on these guys. I'm seeing it wearing down on them, and it's a reality. We've got a couple deputies, they're young, and the stuff they've been exposed to already in their career, 4 or 5 years into it, I'm just shocked. I mean, that's inner city, and they're dealing with this stuff on their own, and a lot of times their backup isn't there. We had a deputy that got into a conflict out, the Goss family. And that deputy was responding to a simple dispute. It just so happened to be one of the people in the car was an off-duty employee of ours who was a civilian employee, and they were somewhat lost. went down a wrong driveway, and that simple dispute between them, our deputy responding ended up in a fight. Our deputy believes he was fighting for his life. He was able to pull his firearm, shot the person, but his response was 20 minutes, his cover. A lot can happen in 20 minutes. That tussle from the time that individual went at our deputy, left his truck, and went at that deputy for a physical confrontation until the time our deputy got a shot off after rolling around on the ground and fighting over the gun, at least that's what they said in court, probably lasted 1 to 2 minutes. And I just happened to see one of our responding cars going down Woodman. It was on a weekend, and I saw him going so fast, I called dispatch because I knew something was wrong. And I mean, that's what these, when I talk about the tension they're under, the stress they're under, what they're dealing with, when they go to those simple calls, they know their cover is far away. They know in their mind how long it's going to take somebody to get there. And it's just one of those things they deal with, and there comes a point where they start saying, this isn't worth it, especially if they drive through a community, this community or any other one, and they see one person in a car and 2 or 3 cop cars behind it pulling them over. They're like, wow, is that what it's really like, that you have people there backing you up? You actually have cover. You're assured you're probably going to go home safe that day. We can go to the next one. This is where we're getting down to it. If you guys want to take a nap during this portion, I don't blame you, because you're not going to be able to address this. We had a staffing study done back in 2006. It was not based on response times. It was based on the workload that our deputies are handling. And they basically said at that time, you need 29 more patrol deputies right now. And then within the next couple years, you're going to need 11 more to be properly staffed for the workload you guys are facing. And that just gets you to a point a couple years down the road. This is what led and was one of the components to 1A, which went on the ballot in 2000, what year was that, 8 or 9? 8? That was defeated by the public. It's still there. The staffing is still there. I've showed you the data. I've showed the commissioners the data. And that's why I'm a little cynical when I say, go ahead and take a nap. You can't do anything about this. Nothing's been done to this point. So the reality is I know the money isn't there, and that's just how we're going to have to deal with it. We can go on to the next slide. You can see that's about $6 million to fund that, to get our staffing up to where it should have been in 2009. We'll talk a little bit about the detention. We've already gone through the requirements and what's driven. We'll go to the next slide. Compare our staffing ratios going back to 95. You see what it was in 2006. We were really peaking our population. The overcrowding was serious, very serious at that time. We've done a lot of measures to try to control that population, done inmate programs, as well as I did something I really didn't have the statutory authority to do. I told all the law enforcement agencies in our community, I think it was in September of 2009, I will no longer accept new charge misdemeanors. I don't have the space for them. And so policy decisions like that kind of helped us out. But you can see our staffing ratio is still 1 to 58, still significantly high. This is kind of a snapshot of our average daily population. I think there's actually very good news in this. You can see from about, all the way back to 1996, and you can go back to 1988. We were on an upward climb as our community grew, our jail population grew, and we've become a little more sophisticated at evaluating due to the implementation of a new jail management system back in 2001 that fed us a lot of data of what the contributing factors were, and began evaluating it and developing. In 99, it's kind of an anomaly. DOC opened up new facilities, and they took a whole bunch of backlog out. But once those facilities filled up, you can see we got into 2000, 2001, we were on that upward trend. The biggest contributors to the growth in that population was obviously more cops were put on the road in 2001 under the city's program. Their public safety sales tax, I think, was the title of it. We started seeing prisons filling up. We started seeing, with that, a backlog of our parole detainees that are really state offenders, but they didn't have room in the prison system, so they were backlogging in our facility, and it really sent us rocketing up in our jail population. We were able to evaluate and incorporate a lot of changes in how we did business, incorporate reintegration and recovery programs, work with Immigration and Customs Enforcement to move their prisoners through quicker, work with parole to get theirs out of our system, work with the state. Matter of fact, I sat on a couple advisory boards to the Department of Corrections of what they could do different to change some of their procedures to free up space for the inmates that were sitting in county jails. And so there was a lot of different approaches, and I think most notably was the things we were doing inside to cut recidivism as well as reduce the average length of stay. A lot of times people get wrapped up in your average daily population and the growth of that being the number of offenders that are arrested. Well, that really has no meaning if your average length of stay is where your growth is really happening. It's the same number of offenders, same number being booked in, they're just consuming more bed days. And that was one of the biggest things we recognized, is we weren't moving people through the courts quick enough. People on parole, mental health, the growth among their average length of stay was in the 80 to 90%. We developed strategies to overcome that, and we started seeing the benefits of it in 2007, 2008. We started seeing that growth taper off, and then we were fortunate enough by the time we hit 2009, 10, and 11, we started seeing it taper. Prior to the programs we put in place, our recidivism rate was right around 68 to 72%. After 2.5 years of running our reintegration and recovery program, which is I could go into depth and talk an hour about it, we saw our total facility recidivism drop to about 58%. It's back up to about 60, 61%, but every 1% that we can drop that recidivism frees up beds. And there's a huge cost saving in that, and I think that's why, well, we know that's why we've seen the decline, and we're just trying to keep it manageable and bring it down. What was a real crisis in 2008 and 9, we seem to have a handle on it. I've actually been able to go now for 3 years without getting phone calls 3 times a day asking how many beds we have remaining and being told 5, 6, 8, and trying to make the decision, do we shut it down and not take any more offenders or not? So some things that took us years to start to see the benefit have finally paid off. We can go ahead to the next one. Well, you see here was the average length of stay I was talking about. Paroles, it was up 190 or 129%. Felony offenders, 192%. Mentally ill, but the overall jump in the average length of stay was 45. Now, we have reduced that average length of stay since. I think we reached, I think we were up to 26 days per offender, and we're starting to see it drop back down to the 22 number in 2011. So you can move it one and have a huge benefit to it. We'll go to the next slide. A lot of people ask, you know, it seems we've built a lot of beds. Do we have more beds in other jurisdictions? Is something wrong with us? This kind of tells you, no, we're right in there. We're the most populous county in the state. The city and county of Denver would be number 2. Other than that, we're pretty far ahead of all the others. Our jail bed count per 1,000 is right in there with the mix of population we have. I would call it right in the average. We're doing real well in managing those beds we do have. Go to the next slide. Here's another comparison. This one is a comparison of the number of employees per 100,000 population. See El Paso at 61, Arapahoe 68. It's the same story. You do a comparison to the counties. We're doing a lot more with less. None of those other jails have the same population we have. None of those other jails also have to transport inmates from one facility by van to another facility. They have their courthouse adjacent to their jail, and they usually have some type of corridor that connects the two. We have to run them in groups of 6 to 10 back and forth. Some days we transport 120 inmates between CJC and the courthouse. We did a same study in 2006 based on the National Institute of Corrections. This again, going back to 2006, based on the design of our facility, which is the same today as it was then. And they said you need an additional 30 personnel to staff the fixed posts you have that are critical to the operation. That price tag to get those 30 additional personnel is $3.5 million. It's another one of those. The money is not there. That staffing is not going to be addressed. But it does not, because the money's there, does not relieve me of the responsibility of keeping this in front of the public and in front of the commissioners as a necessity and something that should be addressed. When my jail staffing, the authorized on that sheet, is at the full authorized, I'm at minimum staffing. Now I've got to figure out and juggle schedules for vacation, sick, injured, ill, and this thing probably that has had the most significant impact, and I don't remember which president it was either President Reagan or President Bush that brought about the Family Medical Leave Act, which allows people to have X number of time off, and even if it's a family member or whatever, that kills our staffing. It's the law, I got to live with it, but it is not something that the commissioners came to my predecessor and said, hey, what's the impact of this going to have on you, and what do we need to do to increase your staffing to make sure you stay whole? It never happened. Did it happen with you, Ken? So it's a cost of doing business, and it's a cost of keeping people safe, and I'll be back next year with these same numbers saying this is what we need. You'll see comment in there that we're struggling on the basic necessities of everyday business. Copy machines, paper, those supplies. And the thing is a lot of what we generate is not for us. It's for somebody else. The courts, the victims, the DA. I mean, it's somebody else that wants that information. We just document it. We already talked about the salaries. We have really fallen behind in the last 6-7 years. We were at the midpoint of the market. We weren't at the top. We weren't at the bottom. We're clearly at the bottom now. It's a very, very costly price tag. And when you talk about it, people like to say, whoa, don't go there. You know, a lot of people have been laid off. Well, those laid off people rely on us to come address their problems. And it takes people to deal with those problems. And, you know, we're doing what we can to stay competitive. I think the market is helping us to some extent. Our attrition is at a controllable level, but it's still a costly thing to replace an experienced person, especially somebody that's dedicated and works at the level they do. Constant budget stress. Outside of the legislative process, that's probably the thing. That and the safety of my deputies is what causes me the most sleepless nights. When I start off the year with a brand new budget on January 1st, I am already $800,000 in the hole if I'm fully staffed, because I am under budgeted for the number of authorized positions I have. Is what happened was we went through a series of budget reductions back in 1998, I think it was. We had underspending every year, so they cut that underspending out, saying you've had this for the last several years. Well, that's great. That was true. I was comfortable with it for a couple years, but it was a temporary budget reduction. Ken, you remember those. Temporary means we're going to call it that until we make it permanent. They always go permanent. And so now, January 1, I don't have enough salary money to fund all of the salaries of my people for the entire year. We make it happen. We scramble. We do mid-year freezes. We tell people to do without, and we make it work. But that's just an example of one of those things that contributes to the stress. And when I'm told we need a flood management plan, I don't have the money to do it. I don't have the people to do it. And those are the things and the type decisions that are made. I have another county comparison here. If we go to the next slide. Talks about the population, the sheriff's office budget. This is 2011 data, not 2012. That's the data we had available again for comparison. You'll see the cost per citizen, sheriff's total FTE count, the number of employees per 1,000, and then, of course, the jail population. I think it's just a good reference for you to have, and it'll give you an idea if you're ever asked, is the sheriff's office operating at an efficient level? If you can find more efficiency, let me know. I'd be happy to hear it. And I can argue with anyone, we are operating at a lower dollar value than any other of the major counties. And I don't count the small ones, they're not comparable. Here's our inmate to detention staff ratio. Gives you a number, so 8.7 inmates if you're in the El Paso County system. If you're working in the Arapahoe or the Jefferson, the next two largest jail systems, or even Adams, you're supervising half the inmates. Nothing else can be said any simpler than that. Move on to the next one. When we're talking about the staffing, when we fail to address it, we go from a proactive. When we fail to address the challenges we face, we go from proactive to reactive. We're no longer doing active patrols, it's all response, which means our activities are dictated going from one call to the next. Not doing officer initiated, not driving through the neighborhoods looking for potential problems, but just being driven by criminal activity, the response. Reduction in traffic enforcement, we had to reduce that this year because of shortages on staffing and the calls for service backing up. We have put in an electronic system that citizens have the option of either filing the report online or we will still respond. And I've maintained that attitude and that direction to my staff. We're not going to do like a lot of agencies did and said we're no longer responding to this, or this. We will always respond. It just may take 2 days for us to do it. We will prioritize. You have the option of going online, filling out a report. We'll assign it a case number. It'll go into our RMS system. And then you can, or you can wait until the calls for service that are prioritized, your number comes up and we can free up a car. And we have held to that and we've stood behind it and we'll continue to do that. But there are people that sometimes have to wait a day or two for us to come address their issue. Obviously, that's not a burglary in progress or a major crime, a serious crime. It's usually criminal mischief, vandalism, stuff like that, maybe minor theft. The next slide is just some performance things. Some of them are somewhat surprising. You know, you can lose sight of them. The number of gallons of fuel, miles driven, dispatch calls received, the number of 911 calls. Let me comment on that. 911 calls many times are medical calls, and once we get on the phone with that person, that dispatcher is tied up. So if we have 4 on duty, they take that call, they're tied up. If the line's disconnected, they're trying to call back to reconnect. I mean, they are committed. So if we get 3 911 calls and we only have 4 working, 3 people are basically what I call out of service, and we're relying on that one to take the rest of the calls coming in. It's just the nature of the business, and we try to stay connected and provide as much safety as we can. Number of inmates booked into the jail, 21,000. Inmates transported to court, 19,900. You can see extraditions. One of the things that we're facing, you see the number of public visits. That's family and friends coming to visit the inmates. We have it broken up. Certain days, certain families can come in and visit. 75,000 a year. That's all done through video visitation, and that video visitation system has reached its service life. It's at the end of its life. It keeps failing on us. If you pay attention, you've seen in the news where our video visitation system has been down for weeks at a time while we're scrambling to find pieces and parts because it's an old analog system. Everything today is digital, and it's a system that's going to have to be replaced. The option to replacing that system is to go in with major construction and build visitation facilities in the existing jail, primarily the new tower. And that would be in the multi-millions of dollars. It was in there to begin with. We took it out to rely on video visitation to cut the cost of that tower and gain the number of beds that went into that new tower back in 2004. So it's just one of the decisions that was made, and our reliance was on technology, and the technology's paid off well. You see 231 hazmat calls last year, 516 wildland fire incidents. That's a lot of activity. We'll move into the AFRs, which is I think what you guys are most interested in. There's the patrol deputies. If we put 29 patrol deputies on the road, we need 14 support. That is primarily records and dispatch to handle the volume that they will generate. There's 4.5 million. Phase 2 of patrol was 11 additional, plus 5 civilian ongoing. Again, dispatch, records, fleet, HR to accommodate that. That was another 1.6 million. Detention staffing, 30 FTEs to staff the fixed positions we have. That number takes into consideration the time we lose from an employee. I did a study once. I think the average employee is assumed to work or has a maximum working hours per year, not counting overtime. I think it's like 2,192 hours a year. Our employees, and we try bumping that up, probably do around 1,850 hours in their primary duty assignment because of vacation, illness, injury, training, things like that. So you have to take that into consideration when you figure what it costs to staff one position 365 days a year, holidays included, and then how much time you actually have available for those. The ratio is basically 6 to 1. You want to fill one position, you need 6 bodies. So 30 looks like a lot, but when it comes down to it, we're probably trying to staff 5 or 6 positions. That's what we're trying to staff. See the cost there, $3.5 million. Court and transport, the volume we're dealing with today, it creates a lot of stress. The courts are pretty flexible with us. We'll tell them, county court, district court has priority. We'll tell county court, we're not going to get your inmates to you. We're backed up. It's a heavy court date. And when we start getting up into the hundreds and you have 30, 35 courts and you have 40 personnel and you have 3 trials, we can run out of people very quickly. That is if everybody that is on salary for court services is there. But, you know, we expect them to take vacations and take breaks and go to training and all that kind of stuff. So you see the cost there is $1 million. Matter of fact, that number goes back to when the courthouse was built. We said if you move criminal courts into the new tower, this is the staffing we're going to need to dedicate to that tower. They said, don't worry, we're just going to run civil in the new building. Well, about halfway through that, they decided they're going to run criminal in it. So the county couldn't afford to give us the staffing we need. We're making it work, but it does create a lot of stress, and it makes other areas inefficient. Judges in county court waiting for offenders have to wait, sitting there with prosecutors and defense waiting for us to bring an inmate in because we're too busy. It's not efficient. But we do what we can do, and the courts work with us very well. Then emergency services, we need 3 more people in there. I'd probably adjust that up after the Waldo to 5, 2 part-times, and go with my deputy fire marshal's suggestion that we come up with funding to pay for the fire season salary, not a full-time, but get part-time, so that we know when we call and we need an engine boss, a truck boss, we have somebody that's willing to take responsibility and take those crews out. So the cost could go up, but this is what we've been asking for. It's $314,000. One of those is a fire investigator, due to the number of arsons we have to investigate, another emergency planner, and then another fire person, deputy fire marshal. The next slide, overtime. Our overtime cost for the Waldo Canyon is roughly $100,000. My budget for overtime is right around $400,000. 10 years ago, I think I had $600,000 or $700,000. It's been cut. And I know the first impression on people is overtime is something guys do when they want to make money. They don't need overtime. But under federal law, in the Department of Labor and the Fair Labor Standards Act, when employees work, they have to be compensated. You can compensate them in 2 ways. You can pay them, or you can give them the time off. If it's within the same work cycle, you can give them the time off 1 for 1. If you let that work cycle go from one work cycle into the next, which we're on a 28-day work cycle, they have to be compensated at 1.5 times. So if they worked one full shift and you let it roll over because you can't give them the time off in that cycle, then now you owe them a day and a half off. And that is federal law. We've been audited 3 times. I add up and I get a report every month from our comptroller where we're sitting with comp time on the books because it's a liability. Either I pay it or I give the people the time off. I can't give the people the time off or it's going to significantly impact the safety of the community, the safety in the jail. So we find ways and we juggle it and we try not to carry it from one year to the next, but oftentimes we do. We took our overtime, what people are working, the hazmat people, the SWAT people, the guys that are called in on their days off to supplement staffing because it's short, and the court time, which 2/3 of my patrol guys are called into court when they're off duty. Swings and midnights. Most courts are at 9 in the morning. So they're off duty outside their normal shift. They're called into court to testify on one of their cases. Then that's going to generate overtime. And this $1.3 million represents what it has averaged over the last several years that we would have to pay to keep from having to give people time off, because when you give them time off, when you're minimally staffed, you now have to call somebody in to work for them because you're already minimally staffed. It's a constant battle. It's a constant juggling. Last year, we paid off probably $600,000 in overtime, $700,000 out of money that we brought in from the Immigration and Customs Enforcement contract I have for housing their offenders. And the intent was to start off 2012 with the least amount of liability we could, because we know we don't have the staffing to give people time off and we don't have the money to pay. When you expect people to come in on their days off and go to court, when you expect them to respond to emergencies, whether it's fire, whether it's hazmat, whether it's an investigation, that they don't want to go home and let the bad guy get away, they want to stay hot on the trail, we got to compensate them. And right now, if the Department of Labor were to audit, we would have a hard time explaining when our deputies are doing all their case reports, because they're not doing it on duty time because they're jumping call to call to call. They're giving a lot of time, and the law says they can't do that. But I think it shows what level of dedication we have. It also shows what level of risk we're taking. And really, as the employer and as members of the community, how fair are we being? This is what it would take to get our overtime at a level where some years it wouldn't all be used. Other years, like this year, more than that would have been used because it's an unusual event. But just the Waldo Canyon for that 10 days was $100,000 in overtime. And we didn't have near the devastation that the city of Colorado Springs had to deal with or control. We were able to start letting people back into their homes a lot quicker and didn't have the vandalism and the burglaries and all that take place that you heard in other parts of the community. Medical contract, we don't have figures on this. We're up for a bid. The commissioners are going to fund this, whether you guys recommend it or not. They don't have any choice, and I don't mean to sound calloused. I don't mean to sound arrogant, but it's a fact. State law says they have to fund this. We're estimating the bid could come in anywhere from $200,000 more than what it is right now to $800,000. The $800,000 comes from a figure that we saw the next lowest competitor to our current contract, what their difference was in what we currently were under. So it's going to be a real toss of the dart. I have no idea. I think our current service provider that we've been in contract with, matter of fact, we extended it through this year to get us through a tough budget cycle. The board gave us a year to go ahead and extend it 1 year at the locked-in cost. We do have to go out for bid. We're in the 4th year. This will be the 5th. And we've had some concerns with this current medical provider, and I think this bid process is a healthy process to make them go through. So it's something we're going to have to do, but with that comes the risk of them or any other competitor, the lowest cost being $800,000 more than what we're paying today. So there's a threat, if you want to call it that, a risk that we're possibly facing. But under procurement guidelines, it's something that really needs to be done anyway. We need to go out for bids, see what's out on the market. But I know with medical costs, the liability that those providers accept, it's going to come at a cost. The next one is the food contract. That's another one that the expenses are paid by the county. They have to fund it. We have a 7-year contract with these. We got that specifically designated 7 years to control the cost of the increase of food, and it's worked to our favor. In the last few years, when the gas crunch hit, we saw food costs going up 30%. We were already under a contract. They had an option of terminating the contract, which they didn't want to do, or absorbing the cost, and they absorbed it, which was a benefit to the El Paso citizens of El Paso County. Food costs have somewhat stabilized. They're still going up an average of 2 to 3% a year. And so this is just an increase reflecting that. It's based on the regional market for the food industry, and that's how they arrive at the 2.87. So we're looking at a $49,000 increase there. Extradition, another statutory requirement. Our current contract's $298,000. We're asking the board for another $5,000 to accommodate whether there's any increase in fuel, which seems to drive most of the extradition. Cost of airline tickets can go up. It seems it has been going up. So this is to offset those cost increases. Whether they give this money or not, if we expend that, they're going to pay for it. I mean, it's a statutory requirement of mine. If the money doesn't exist anywhere else, which I could tell you today, if I was overspent, they can't take the money anywhere else out of my budget because I'm either scheduled to break even or overspend in the big picture of my current budget. So they'll have to fund that, just like the food and medical. Maintenance technology, they don't have to fund. We could possibly lose the support and the maintenance and the upkeep of some of our software systems. We anticipate a 5% increase in those. We're looking at a $4,000 increase just to maintain and preserve a maintenance agreement on those software systems, which usually includes any upgrades that come along that need to address problems or glitches, or just cleaning the systems up. And I'm sure there's people in here that know more about that IT stuff than I do. Vehicle operation, we're asking for a $40,000 increase in fuel. We're doing pretty good on fuel this year. Last year we were in real trouble, and the year before that because the cost was going up faster than we could keep track of. Through the diligence of our comptroller, we were able to lock in fuel prices again. And we're actually doing pretty well. The market has been good to us at our lock-in rate. Costs have gone up, but we haven't had to eat that. So it was a gamble where we bought in at a little higher than what the costs were. And it's a gamble that they're going to go up higher than what we think, and it's benefited us. But anything tied to petroleum, as you know, has gone up. And when you're driving almost 3 million miles, there's a lot of oil changes in there, and things like oil and tires and all that are tied to petroleum, and there's a cost of increase. So we're asking for $45,000, $5,000 of that being the tire replacement. And that's not being by the number of tires, it's by the cost of those tires increasing. Ammunition, I already talked about. That's a $4,600 increase. Investigations, our crime lab costs have been going up. We're anticipating $10,000 a year. And then we combine SANE exams. SANE exams are the exam, the forensic exam that's conducted by a specially trained medical professional. The cost of those kits in that service has gone up tremendously. The only resource we have in town is Memorial Hospital. They have limited staff to do that, and we're expecting an increase in those. One of the things we face is by law, we have to absorb the cost of that. Even if there is not a prosecution, an arrest, or even a case report generated, we have to eat the cost. And it's how that scenario works is let's say a female is raped. She wants to remain anonymous. She doesn't want to report it. There's many reasons why. Matter of fact, I think nationally only 26% of sexual assault victims actually report it to law enforcement. It's very underreported for many reasons. But if they go to the hospital, request this exam, the hospital performs the exam, and that person can remain anonymous. The hospital does not have to give us their name, and we just get a bill. And under state law, the agency responsible, so wherever that jurisdiction or the assault took place based on that victim, the bill comes to us. and we have to pay it. And we're seeing more of those, but we're also seeing a lot of sexual assaults that are requiring SANE exams for us to collect the evidence. And it's a compounding factor when the hospital systems keep increasing the cost of those. And that's what we've been the victim of the last several years. This kind of summarizes it. Law enforcement staffing, you can see the combined there is roughly 4, 5, 6.1, 6.2 million. Detention staffing, emergency services staffing, overtime, and then the things that you guys have seen every year: medical contract, which is the contractual increase, food contract, contractual increase, maintenance, technology maintenance, extraditions, some vehicle operation, ammunition, and then our SANE exams and our crime lab. Total there is 13 million. I have no expectation that you guys are going to be able to make a recommendation and these things are going to happen. I've been around long enough. I know what the county's budget situation is. I also am a realist. And I know that unless something is decided among the public, we're going to be in the same situation, having the same Groundhog Day we did this year and next year. And even if the economy turns around, because I keep having people say, hey, maybe this gas and oil will do something, or hey, the economy's going to turn around. We're starting to see signs of it. It doesn't matter. And if you guys haven't got the Tabor lecture, you will. The ratcheting down effect has created a new baseline. We can't grow and pick up everything we've lost. I've had 26 employees that I've had to cut, positions I've had to cut just in the last 7 years. And Tabor is not going to allow us to make a leap so I can recover just those 26. Let alone the 29 and 11 and the 30 that we should have been getting all along under the theory of as a community grows, your services and your resources will grow. That just hasn't happened. I can tell you that the medical contract, the food contract, probably my IT maintenance, maybe ammunition, vehicle operation, those may get funded. And history tells me that's probably what's going to get funded. But I still need to keep it in front of you and the public of what the needs are. I'm going to move into the next version here. It's titled The Capital Needs. This first slide, capital needs, immediate needs. The most pressing there is our vehicle storage facility. That's going to require a pretty sizable building. We've had estimates put together, even some preliminary design. We are renting the building now at about $120,000 a year. It's worked out real well for us. It's right adjacent to our main operation right now, which is convenient. But that building's owner is planning on leveling that building at some point, or maybe bringing in a tenant that's going to pay a lot more than what we're paying. They kind of worked a deal with us. They are a locally owned development company. They knew we were struggling with facilities, and they gave us a real good deal. But at some point, I'm sure they're going to want their building back, either to demolish it as part of their downtown renewal, or they're going to get a tenant in there that they can start recovering some of their investment on it. ESD equipment, that's everything from hazardous materials, the equipment, the suits that the hazmat guys carry, the testing equipment, all the way through the wildland fire team and some of the operating equipment they would use in the fire in the field for fighting fires. We did have this request up here, and I would probably reduce that. We're going to have to do some more research. We were able to, at one time, we had no operational wildland fire trucks. With the help of El Pomar and some grants, and then some money that we were able to utilize through our ICE contract, we've been able to replenish and get our brush trucks up to 2 trucks. Right now, the biggest need is a transport vehicle. And that vehicle is to transport the teams, the crews, up into the fire and bring the equipment they need with them. They're pretty heavy-duty vehicles, usually 4-wheel drive. I don't know how to describe it other than a very heavy-duty, not quite armored. Of course, they're not being shot at with bullets or anything, but it kind of looks like that. It's more the equipment it carries and the air conditioning and the environmental protections it offers. 2 of those trucks are probably going to be $300,000 to $500,000. If we could get one, that would be fantastic. North and south sub, absolutely no reality of that happening. It's something that if the planets all aligned and there was an opportunity, and with our staffing, it would be very efficient to get a northeast sub and an eastern sub to better service those areas, but it's certainly not a need that I would consider immediate by any means. Not when I'm just trying to keep enough fuel in our cars and do the basic statutory items. The next sheet is where I do get very concerned. That video visitation system is becoming more and more less reliable. 75,000 visits a year. I tried to attach a fee to it. State law does not allow me to do that. In the legal mind, say if state law does not allow you to collect a fee, you cannot collect a fee. My thought was we charge those that wear it out and use it, but we need to get legislation 3 years in a row. I went to legislators and asked them to consider it, and their response was, we're not entertaining anything with a fee, not after what Governor Ritter did with the fees attached to our vehicles and trailers and things like that. So because they don't want to bring it up, because we may not get the support at the legislature, law doesn't allow us, does not relieve us or alleviate the need to replace this system. It was put in back in 2003. At the time, there was very few vendors. It was an analog system, but the components that keep it running are becoming more and more scarce. The last time it broke, it was down 2 weeks. We had to have parts flown out of Florida after doing a search of where they could find them. So it's just something that we're going to have to replace. If we don't replace it, then we need to hire people to do person-to-person visiting, and that is very manpower intensive, as well as make physical plant modifications to our facility, which is almost ridiculous to even conceptualize, let alone at a dollar amount. This is the most efficient way to do it. We know the cost is a lot of money. We estimate if we use current technology, we can get 15, maybe 15 years out of it, but it is a cost of doing business, and it is something we need to address. Electronic ticketing would make us much more efficient to be able to issue summonses electronically, cut down on that carbon paper, get the information more quickly available through electronic means to the DA and the courts. The cost to do that would be about $200,000. It's not necessarily just the components you use. It's building the infrastructure to connect our systems to the court system, to the DA system. That's where a lot of that money would go. This kitchen equipment at CJC is going to have to be funded. Right now, the dishwasher would not meet health department standards. The only reason they don't shut it down is because we tell them we are in the process of securing the funding. Not only is it tied to health department requirements, we will be going through an American Correctional Association audit beginning next week. And that is one of the mandatory standards we have to meet, that dishwasher is sanitizing those utensils and trays at a certain temperature, and our dishwasher is worn out. We have put thousands of dollars in it, band-aiding it. It's gotten to a point where it's not worth the money to put in, and they can't even fix this temperature issue. The dishwasher is $115,000. As you can imagine, when you're trying to clean the kitchen apparatus and the utensils and the trays for 1,492 inmates, it's got to be pretty high volume. So it's a little more than your Kenmore dishwasher you have in your kitchen. The temperature requirements and all that, since we are the custodians of humans, has to meet pretty strict standards. We also have a kettle and an oven that are failing. The kettle is almost worthless right now. The replacement of those two is, I think the oven was around $15,000. The kettle is $24,000. That equipment wears out, and some of that equipment has been down there for 15 years, and it has reached the end of its life. Module door repair, we used to have a contract with a company. That was cut in one of our budget cuts where we said we don't need maintenance, and now the components have worn out. We did go through the county. The county funded for a service provider to come in and do an assessment of our doors, make minor repairs and adjustments. Some of them, the components are so worn out that they're going to have to replace them. To do the repairs to the A and B, C and D mods, we're looking at $132,000. That's the estimate we have right now, based on what we spent to have them come in and evaluate them. Is what brought us to go down this road is the doors are not functioning properly. They're either not closing correctly, they're not latching correctly, the mechanisms just over the service life are wearing out. We want to put a perimeter fence, finish securing around CJC. We've never completely had a perimeter fence around there. The cost of that is to finish that up is $65,000. We need some upgrade to some of the old cameras that are almost unserviceable, which means you can't view anything through them. They're in such poor condition. The cost of those and the cabling to support the new digital system is about $50,000. If we get our doors repaired and to keep them operational and maybe do more preventative maintenance, we would like to get the money for a maintenance contract on those doors. We've already tried it without it. You can see what happens. Now let's get back to maintaining it, spend the money. I don't know, it may work out, may not, but it's something that I have to bring forward, and the cost of that maintenance contract annually is $30,875. Our gas pumps are the original pumps from 1988. They're starting to fail. Matter of fact, when the repair people come in, they kind of like to admire them. They consider them antiques. Like antiques, it's getting hard to find parts for. Just to replace the fuel dispensers, we're looking at about $30,000. I think it's something we could also build in a little more efficiency, and in keeping with our records, upgrade the technology for another $40,000, to where we're sure the gas is only going into a car that it's authorized. There's times that we do the audits on our gas. We were waiting to see where we periodically check it to make sure nobody is tampering with it or stealing it. I think it'd be a bad plan to go to a law enforcement agency and steal their gas, but there is technology out there where as soon as you connect the hose in, it reads a chip in that filler, which gives you the mileage, the unit, and all that information. It would be a nice thing to have for records keeping, but at a minimum, those pumps need to be replaced. They keep breaking. So it's always a guess. It's always a guess when you go down, is pump 2 working today or not? And it was down for about 2 months. I was pretty excited to see the old guy up and running again. I think pump 3 is the next one to die. It's a good thing we have 4 and not just 2. So we have a little flexibility as they die, but it's just something that's going to have to be addressed. Laundry equipment, we have 2 washers in the laundry facility that have reached their life expectancy. The cost of those is going to be about $30,000. Professional visit alert system, right now when we bring professional visitors in, like attorneys and so forth, they are escorted by our staff. It's time consuming to our staff. We'd like to put in an electronic system where that person can walk their way to where they need to go, and we can track them electronically based on they carry a device with them, and it has a panic alarm on it. If they get into trouble, if they're in an attorney visit, their client beats on them a little bit or something, we have a way to respond and be notified. Otherwise, it's a human resource tied up for that visit, and that can get very costly. We'll be moving into the new county office building. It'll be the new sheriff's headquarters. We would like to expand our interview rooms for our criminal investigations from 2 to 3. We currently have 2. We have a need for another one. There's no space in our current location, so we're planning for the 3. The electronics for the audio and video taping, as well as a device called a smart board that we use where individuals can draw maps based on their recollection, whether it be witnesses or suspects, has proven very valuable in court, and we'd like the rooms all equipped very similarly. The reason you want them equipped the same is if we have 2 rooms that have cameras and recording equipment and one that doesn't, it won't take long for the defense to accuse you of conducting interviews in rooms that are not cameraed with intent because you have something to hide. So you want those rooms all equipped the same. The policies on interviewing and interrogating, that they're all recorded, both voice and video, so that you can never be questioned as to what testimony was given. So it sounds like, okay, they want to go 2 to 3. You know what? They don't need it. We're going to have to do it somehow, because I don't want to put ourselves in a position where we're accused of certain people are interviewed in the non-recordable room and others are interviewed. What's going on here? That looks awful suspicious. Often we're in the business of defending everything we do and proving we didn't do what we're accused of doing. It's just the nature of the business sometimes. We're not always interacting with some of the most honest people in the world. Entrance door to E-Tower. This is a new one. This isn't necessarily a mechanical failure. This is a building settling issue. The door is at its maximum adjustments. The building has settled slightly, and to go in and repair that door, to keep it functioning, the option is the door will not lock or someday it will not open. This is about $15,000 to tear it out and reset it to compensate for the settling that has taken place. Some of you may have heard we have a new device in our intake release area. It's similar to what you would see at TSA at the airports. The only difference is it uses a different technology and a different X-ray technology, whereas we can see stuff that is hidden within the body. So drugs or weapons that somebody either ingests or puts up places none of us would imagine storing things. Every person admitted to CJC now goes through this device. It's called Secure Pass. It's very technical, and the intent is to either discourage or catch illegal drugs being smuggled into the facility through body cavities, which is 90% of the way they're coming in now. Everybody knows we do pat searches, metal detector strip searches. This device, it treats everyone the same. They go through, we have a snapshot of what's in their clothing, concealed under their clothing, or has been ingested in their body. If we suspect narcotics, it gives us the probable cause to take them to medical professionals to have cavity search or begin the preventative medical procedures in anticipation of overdoses. And in the in-custody deaths we've had, they happen for two reasons. One is an overdose, one is a suicide. Well, three natural causes, which we don't see very often. The most common are overdose. And in one night, we almost had 6 people overdose on heroin. That heroin was brought in a body cavity and distributed. So it's something we take serious. We invested $211,000 in that technology. The maintenance on it is $12,000. So I'll be asking the board to fund that. I've also asked the board for a budgetary increase to the operational cost of our patrol division. And then we're going to need to put a ventilation system into our narcotics storage at our evidence facility. Because what happens is the narcotics, especially marijuana, heroin, some of those will give off spores or grow bacteria. It becomes hazardous to the employees. CSPD ran into this a couple of years ago and had to do some major ventilation changes to theirs. We didn't have the volume, but we're starting to see the volume now, and we're going to have to build that ventilation into ours. It's about $6,200. In addition to the things I've mentioned, which if you've been kind of thinking about it, most of what I've just talked about are items that are wearing out, that should have been on a replacement schedule, should have been maintained and weren't. A lot of those items are going to be replaced or repaired one way or another, and the county's going to have to find the money. We can probably help with some of it through the Immigration and Customs Enforcement contract we have, so long as we're still housing inmates, but that's a decision that's made elsewhere. And it's made based on a lot of different circumstances. And for the first 6 months of this year, we saw the population down around 10 to 20. Now it has spiked. We've been averaging 90 to 100 the last month and a half, 2 months, I think. So we're in a great opportunity, but it's not revenue we can count on for anything ongoing. And I think depending on the outcome of the next election, depending on which way it goes, I think politically, we could either see those numbers grow, which would, I think, be very beneficial to us financially, or we can see that terminate, which is a reality. And that's a funding mechanism that has been paying for a lot of the stuff to keep the pressure off the Board of County Commissioners that will no longer be there. Also asking for reinstatement of those things that have been cut. They all look familiar. It's patrol staffing, law enforcement, court and transport, food contract, operating supplies, professional services, salary, and overtime. All those things that are still needed that were cut, most of which were temporary budget reductions made permanent. That would be a good baseline to begin. And then on the final page, you'll see we have a summary of everything. There's no doubt in my mind, if somebody's trying to come up with a catchy title, it will be "The Sheriff is Asking for the Moon." is what it should say, and it just so happens to be the same things he's been asking for a long time. There is consistency. The same backup exists. The same statistics are there. And anything else you would like to see or you'd be interested in, I'll be happy. I think for the public side of this, I think there's some value in acknowledging that we have done things to try to compensate for our lack of staffing and so forth. And it's been through volunteerism. We run a reserve program. That program still costs money. We have to train those people. We have 10 in training right now, and they go to class 2 nights a week and all day Saturday. That is quite a commitment for them to do for 8 or 9 months. Then they will go into the FTO training program. If history repeats itself, I'll be lucky to get 7 of the 10 that started. We also use Citizens Patrol. That's been a huge success. They really proved their worth and value during the Waldo Canyon fire. They supported the city in a lot of their traffic control. More or less, they pulled a lot of those things that did not require a sworn officer to handle, and they were out on the streets and they were putting in a lot of hours too. It would be pretty interesting to attach a dollar value to the number of volunteers that helped us meet our statutory requirements and the services we provided in the Waldo Canyon fire, because there was a lot of them. We already have over 500 volunteers. We're using them in every fashion we can. But the one thing that's been forgotten is I have never been given a budget for my reserve program. I've never been given funding or a budget for the Citizens Patrol. We've eaten it, and it's getting very difficult to continue to support those things. We'll find a way. And if that means siphoning gas out of the cars we impound, that might be an option. But I mean, that's what it's getting down to. We've done a lot of things to try to operate as efficiently as we can. We'll continue to do those things. But there comes a point where you can't even afford to utilize the volunteer services because you don't have the money to put them in a car, you don't have the gas to fuel it, or you don't have the equipment to give them, or the impact they have on your operating supplies exceed your annual allocation. And we're there now. And I am considering giving back emergency services and planning as well as hazmat to the Board of County Commissioners because I've got no support for it, and I can no longer absorb those functions, especially when I'm being told you need to make this a priority, you need to make that a priority. You guys can have it back, you can prioritize it how you want. I guarantee you're going to spend 10 times what I spend on it. And in some cases, 10 times 0 is still 0, but I think they'll get the hint. Hazmat, 231 calls, I've been eating that. I've been finding ways when they get pulled off their duty to have somebody come in and compensate them or pay them off, whatever I got to do. But it's not my statutory responsibility. I know there's nobody else in the county that can do it as well as we can. We have the training, we have the equipment, and there's probably nobody else in the county government that can do the emergency planning better than we do. And I think we've shown we're very good at it because it's much better than it was when the county oversaw it. How long ago was that, Lauren? Probably back in 1995. That's when it went to the sheriff's office, and it's much better than it ever was. But I can't keep eating it. And it isn't worth the stress it creates when I know we can't do it right, and I got to rob from patrol or the jail to continue to do these functions. So I've unloaded a lot of things on you. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions.
Sheriff Maketa, a lot of information, as usual, for us to digest. I had just 2 things that kind of popped up. One is you touched in the very beginning on the amount of concealed weapons permits that you guys have to deal with. I know there's a training program as part of that. Does that pay for itself?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It pays beyond for itself.
Okay.
Our waiting list backed up this year, and we've seen a growing trend. We were probably back 4, 5, 6 weeks. Because of the revenue it generates, it's 100% self-sufficient. Okay. It also generates above and beyond. It covers 100% of the costs and sometimes helps us out in other areas. We were able to go out and hire 3 additional employees, all of which they'll be temporary. They're full-time temps or part-time. And we've got that wait back down to 2 weeks. But there is a huge rush of people not only purchasing firearms on a national level, and I know that because I sit on several boards for the FBI's CJIS system, but also I'm seeing the same pattern locally with people obtaining concealed weapons permits.
That was just a question that somebody had put towards me, and I was sure that was what the response was, but it was nice to hear it from you. You know, I've been doing this since April of 2008. Things are a little bit better than they were then, but not a whole lot. You know, we've seen from the very beginning that a lot of the different departments need to have training budgets, capital line items, all those things that have eroded over the years. Have you had any conversations about creative ways of being able to generate funds specifically for your capital and operational needs?
You know, I think a lot of creativity is what has kept us sustained.
I agree.
And sustainable to this point. You know, you can count on donations, and sometimes grants cost you more to seek and manage than what the benefit is, and the conditions attached. We brought in $1.2 million over 5 years from the Division of Behavioral Health. We are the first law enforcement agency to go after those funds and be successful in getting them. That is creative. When we ventured into detox, that was very creative. Matter of fact, we tested state systems because they weren't prepared for a sheriff's office, a law enforcement agency, to insert themselves into that realm. Matter of fact, I was told by a very high-ranking state official at that time, the state of Colorado is not ready for what you're proposing. We're not prepared for it. So I guess is what I'm doing is offering a couple of examples of creativity. But creativity only gets so far.
Yeah, it doesn't get 27 million.
Yeah, and we've pretty much exhausted it. The Citizens Patrol, we were not the first to do it. I'll give credit to Douglas County, but we took it far beyond what they're doing, and it costs money to do that. And there's a line in the sand where they can't cross it. They're not trained to that level, and they don't have statutory authority to arrest. And so we've done a lot of creative things. We came up with an IGSA contract. I flew to D.C. and sat down with the Deputy Director of Housing and Removal and offered our services and told them how it could benefit them and where they could benefit and we could benefit, and we landed it. But it doesn't go on forever, and it's not sustainable enough to cover the ongoing costs of an FTE. I think we've exhausted it. It doesn't mean we quit looking.
Yeah.
But the list is growing from 3 years ago, and a couple of you have been in here and you're seeing it grow.
Yeah.
I brought forward things this year that have to be repaired just in the repair list. And some things you just got to bite the bullet and they got to be fixed. Okay.
Well, you know, as you know, we do prioritizations, but we also, try to make recommendations, and some of that can be acted upon and some of it cannot. So that's why I was just asking for ideas from you when we're starting to do deliberations on what kind of recommendations that we make.
You know, the county's revenues are not sufficient to support the county responsibilities. That's the bottom line, and that's what nobody wants to talk about. And I hope my commissioners are listening, because I think it's time they talk about it. And there's a two-prong approach. Number one, asking yourself, and they need to ask themselves, are the revenues appropriate to fund and support those things we have today? And then, are those resources adequate for what we're expected to do and what we're statutorily required to do? Then the next thing is have those revenues kept up with growth? And if the economy does turn, will that suffice to get us back to where we were 5 years ago, or where we need to be in 10 years? And the answer to that is no. And that's the bottom line, and that's what we don't talk about. That's the discussion that I hope you will bring forward, and I know you have, but it's been in a very quiet sense. These issues I'm bringing forward, the county can't afford. They don't have the funding for it. And there's two things affecting that, and one is Tabor, and whether they go after some debrucing for a temporary time to give them that injection. But also I think they need to restructure some of their revenues. And that's nothing new. They'll admit it in the shadows. It's time they admit it in the sunlight. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us. If we are satisfied with watching our infrastructure decay and we're willing to take responsibility, then we should remain silent. If we're not, then it's time to have those conversations in the daylight.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your attention. I appreciate it, and I wish you the best in your venture. I know you've been drinking from fire hoses, and I'm sure there's a couple more coming. And then you have the honor of presenting this to the Board of County Commissioners, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Terry.
You can go ahead and cut the feed. We're good.